I just want to say thank you guys so much for all of your support on the first 2 videos I've done in this series. The response has been overwhelmingly positive, and since I definitely have a bevy of content to pull from, I thought I'd put out another 3-hour cut for you guys, this time specifically my documentary style videos. So, I hope you guys enjoy, and feel free to select this video from the playlist that I put together for all my sleep type content, so that way you can have it play all night if you'd like. Thank you guys so much, and I hope you sleep well. Charging the mound, screaming in people's faces, trashing the dugout, throwing hats, bats, and balls, and sometimes even throwing punches. There are truly as many ways players can show their immaturity as there are to scratch a run across. As long as players have existed on the diamond, they've been throwing tantrums. Take for instance the brutal on-field altercation between Juan Marichal and John Roseborough back in 1965. When the catcher's return throw to ace Sandy Koufax buzzed Marichal's ear, Juan struck Roseborough twice with his bat, opening a gruesome bloody wound on the backstop's head. The two made up in the following years, but still, an attempted bludgeoning during a ball game is an outsized reaction to what was nothing more than an accident. Now, before we get into the actual players I'm going to catalog, I do want to acknowledge that this assortment of guys is biased a bit towards the last 30 years or so. This is because that's about when the media began having an enormous insight into players' personalities, and those personalities only grew larger under such an intensive magnifying glass. This is also when the era of social media started creeping in, which allowed one's misdeeds to be able to spread within seconds instead of the customary hours to even days. I'm also going to try to look at players that were voraciously immature, either resulting in violence, outright infantile behavior, or some combination of both. As such, a player like Barry Bonds won't be profiled, as he largely operates in the prima donna space, one a bit separate from the immaturity one. Comment below if you want to see me do a most arrogant or egotistical players in baseball list. If I do, he'll be A1 on it. With that being said, let's hop into our first player. Nyjer Morgan's antics today are legendary for their raw immaturity. For example, in 2010, Baltimore outfielder Adam Jones probably would have been a double had Morgan played the ball right, but instead he made a leaping effort and the ball clanged off of Nyjer's glove before bouncing back into the field of play. But then, instead of, cutting his losses by picking up the ball and throwing it in, Morgan threw a fit on the spot, slamming his glove into the ground, ripping off his ball cap, and stomping around like a petulant child, thus giving up an inside the park homer. This and a couple other incidents that were similar ended up causing Morgan to be labeled a head case. He steamrolled catchers in blowout games, would miss catches and then throw his glove into the stands, and once even charged the mound to try to throw punches at a 6'8" Chris Volstad. That one wasn't as much immaturity in the sense that he shouldn't have fought, more so in that during his blind rage he somehow believed he could win versus somebody who was almost a foot taller than him. Of course, this wouldn't end well for Morgan. Perhaps his most infamous tantrum was throwing a ball into the stands and intentionally hitting a fan. In the middle of the 9th inning, in a game between the Nats and the Philadelphia Phillies, Morgan was being lambasted by quote-unquote drunk and disorderly hecklers. So, instead of either ignoring them or firing back with his own words, Nyjer heaved a ball into the stands, nailing an unassuming Phils fan in the temple. This resulted in Morgan receiving a 7-game suspension, and having yet another nail driven into the coffin that was his public image. Why he believed this was an appropriate response was probably born of the same immature mind that invented Tony Plush, an apparent character he would switch into during games. In fact, he had an assortment of these so-called alter egos, Plush being his quote scumbag name. Well, at least there's a dose of self-awareness among the bizarre. Next up is longtime Cubs pitcher, El Toro himself, Carlos Zambrano. While guys like Nyjer Morgan's immaturity might have come out in the form of on-field blow-ups, Zambrano was also outright lazy to boot. He was often called out for his lack of consistent work ethic and absolutely no desire to train despite being the face of the Cubs franchise for so many years. And he admitted as much himself once, famously declaring, "My problem is, I've been lazy." At the time, he was plagued by a bulging disc in his back. Doctors allegedly told him that doing abdominal exercises would help ease the pressure. But Zambrano went on to state, "One of the things I don't like to do is my abs." So, quite simply, he didn't. And, perhaps unsurprisingly, he retired in his early 30s. But Zambrano wasn't immune to outbursts either, including multiple nuclear meltdowns against umpires, and the occasional teammate. Like in 2010, when he and first baseman Derek Lee almost came to blows after Zambrano gave up 4 runs to the Chicago White Sox, following a play Z thought Derek should have made. Then manager Lou Piniella sent the red-faced flamethrower home and banned him from the ballpark the next day. He was also known for breaking bats over his knee when he struck out, consistently firing his mitt against the dugout wall when things weren't going his way, and taking his frustrations out on the dugout Gatorade dispenser. Lazy when working on himself, but demanding of others when it came to their performance? What's more immature than that? Next up is Manny Ramirez. Where do we even begin? Manny being Manny was one of baseball's first memes, appearing in print over 1,600 times throughout Ramirez's career. While some of these instances references slash lines or memorable homers, many others detail the insane stories of Manny's immaturity that he displayed both on and off the field. One of the first examples of Manny being Manny came soon after his call up to the bigs. A Guardians, then Indians, PR director had to sit the young ball player down for a chat. "How you doing for money?" the PR person said. "I'm doing great," Manny responded. "You need some?" As it turned out, Manny hadn't cashed his last 2 months' worth of paychecks. A quick search revealed that Ramirez had left a breadcrumb trail of massive checks, crumpled in his locker, in his glove box, and even in a pair of boots he almost left behind following an away game in Texas. But Manny being Manny didn't end at his absent-mindedness. While on the Red Sox roster, Ramirez was also known for his, let's say, colorful persona. He once relieved himself mid-inning while inside the Green Monster, lost his $15,000 diamond earring sliding into third base in a rehab game, then demanded help looking for it for multiple minutes, delaying the entire ball game, and even refused to stand with a Little Leaguer for the national anthem during a public relations promotion. And while all of these, besides the Little Leaguer thing, had elements of humor to them, there were also instances of Manny being Manny that simply weren't funny at all. Not even a little bit. Like when he shoved Boston's 64-year-old traveling secretary Jack McCormick to the ground in 2008 for not reserving him 16 seats to an away game in Houston. Let's just say, neither Bo Sox fans nor the front office loved that, nor did they love his penchant for mysteriously contracting calf tightness so close to the trade deadline, or how one time when the Yankees were in town, Manny declared himself too sick to play, but yet not too sick to go to the hotel bar with Yankee infielder Enrique Wilson, who was a former teammate of his while on the Cleveland Indians, and live it up a bit. Immature might be the only word to properly describe the phenomenon that Manny being Manny at its height became, but at least part of it was positive, right? Or at least goofy? The same could not be said for the next guy on our list. What probably could be said about Milton Bradley is that he had a near monopoly on being an immature a-hole with a violent streak. Some might say, at the peak of his powers, putting him on the field was like playing Jenga, and he could topple over with the slightest misstep. Okay, board game puns aside, Milton Bradley was a problem. He once gave Texas Rangers fans the finger mid-game, just up and left the stadium during a different contest in which he'd been struggling, and once verbally assaulted an umpire so badly he not only got kicked for the game, but subsequently for another, after the league had learned of what he said. Did I mention that that was just in one season with the Seattle Mariners? Which ended up being his last season in professional baseball, in fact. The tales almost seem mythical in their levels of volcanic stupidity. Another time, after losing his temper following some harsh remarks made to him by an umpire responding to his own frustration, Bradley got so upset that he ended up being basically wrestled to the ground by his own manager, Bud Black. He resisted so much he ended up tearing his ACL in the process. Subsequently, the Padres went on to miss the postseason by 1 game, with then middle-of-the-order Bradley's absence looming large. But Bradley's violence wasn't limited to the baseball field. In 2015, he spent 32 months in prison for domestic violence and weapons charges, and in June 2018, violated his probation with more domestic violence convictions. Basically, his own version of immaturity was that of a toddler throwing a tantrum that just never grew up. And when you're 6 feet, 215 pounds, that's a downright scary proposition. We now come to the only player who is on this list for solely being downright childish in their approach to the game, without the violent streak. Someone who got busted for performance-enhancing drugs and then lied about taking them. Somebody who, at their core, was a serial cheater. Alex Rodriguez. His brand of immaturity is born of an almost pitiful sense of superiority and arrogance, but it was certainly colored by a perception of the world that was just immature. There's no other way to put it. After his initial PED report came out, there was an MLB investigation and an onslaught of bad publicity, but Rodriguez remained firm that he had never used any steroids. For 2 years and profiles in over 5 print publications, he kept up the lie, maintaining that he was the victim of a, quote, witch hunt, resulting in an unjust suspension from baseball, and that he was going to fight to the last to clear his spotless name. Well, the only thing about that was that it was a total fabrication, and Rodriguez only ended up coming clean to federal agents in order to avoid prosecution, ratting out everybody who'd helped him procure the ill-gotten injections from the Florida-based anti-aging clinic where he had gotten his stash. After what felt like a pretty insincere apology, he still didn't take responsibility, instead choosing to go with the story that he thought the HGH being injected into his butt was just vitamins. Sure, Alex. Sure. But that obviously wasn't the only evidence for this immature rap, as in addition to many accounts of him mistreating staffers and other people in the Yankees organization for over a decade, he got caught trying to cheat mid-game not once, but twice. First by screaming, "I got it," as an opponent attempted to catch a pop-up, resulting in them believing that it was their teammate calling them off and the ball dropping. And also by literally slapping the ball from Red Sox pitcher Bronson Arroyo's glove in the 2004 ALCS. At least that one didn't end up standing. At his height, he was so into cheating in fact that he got caught doing it on his own partners twice that we know of. First on his initial wife, and then again on Jennifer Lopez. In an interview with New York Magazine, A-Rod's first ex-wife put it pretty succinctly. I would say he's immature. We do have one honorable mention on this list from the dusty era of baseball, back when these stories couldn't be verified very easily, but regardless, this guy was so bizarre in his actions, I just had to mention them, and that's former Baltimore Orioles player and New York Giants manager, John McGraw. McGraw was a gritty player with a flaming temper of his own and an old school brand of, let's call it, eccentric immaturity. As a player, McGraw helped usher in the era of the Baltimore chop and the hit and run play. Also, according to Bleacher Report, he would routinely trip players rounding third base, spike them, and grab their belt loops to hold them back and keep them from tagging up. Leading one sports writer to opine, he adopts every low and contemptible method that his erratic brain can conceive to win a play by a dirty trick. I saw that line and thought to myself, what sounds more immature than grabbing someone by their belt to hold them back from running? Downright sounds like something out of a cartoon. As a manager for the Giants, McGraw's style was much more strict than oddly immature, though he did once ban his players from smiling in the dugout. Yeah, smiling. From losing your cool and getting thrown out from games, lying about performance-enhancing drugs, or just forgetting your paycheck and a pair of cowboy boots, immaturity can come in a number of different packages. Some harmless, some certainly not. But the one thing every player probably wants to avoid is becoming an icon for the wrong reasons, letting this rep get in the way of their legacy. But for at least everybody on the list today, that's exactly what happened.
Oral Hershiser once said of the late great Tony Gwynn that sometimes it felt like he had a steering wheel on his bat and he could put the ball exactly where he wanted. Another great pitcher, Greg Maddux, explained his approach to pitching to the savvy slugger Barry Bonds this way: "You walk Barry, just walk him." Carl Yastrzemski once said of another legendary hitter, Ted Williams, that, quote, "he studied hitting the way a broker studies the stock market and could spot at a glance mistakes that others couldn't see in a week." There's not much more infuriating or awe-inspiring in the world of baseball than a true genius in the batter's box. Facing some of Major League Baseball's smartest hitters is a daunting task. These players have spent years perfecting their craft. They know the strike zone inside and out. They're able to pick up on subtle changes in a pitcher's delivery and can recognize pitches right out of the hurler's hand. They have exceptional hand-eye coordination and can hit the ball with pinpoint detail wherever it's pitched. Put simply, they're extremely hard to get out. And you know what else they are? Amazing to witness. As a fan, as a player, but perhaps most frustratingly, as a pitcher.
And he's not shooting a testimonial for the toughness of that ice chest.
That's why today, we're going to be looking at some of the smartest hitters in baseball history, and what exactly made them special. Hitter number 1, Tony Gwynn. Perhaps no big leaguer has understood the art of hitting better than the San Diego Padres Hall of Famer Tony Gwynn, and that's because rarely anyone put in the hours that Gwynn put into hitting. It began with his preparation, and the tape. Lots of tape. Decades before big league hitters each had iPads stocked with video footage and analysis of at-bats, pitchers, and hitting mechanics, Gwynn recorded his games at home on his VCR to study his at-bats afterwards. He took his video cassette library on the road with him in a suitcase so he could study in his hotel room too. His teammates jokingly called him Captain Video. Eventually, Gwynn paid $85,000 of his own money to help the Padres install a then state-of-the-art video room in their clubhouse, so those skeptical teammates could have access to the same film he had been benefiting from since 1982. No one in baseball knew his swing, whether it be the opposing pitchers, the defense, or umpires, better than Gwynn. He also knew pitchers' tendencies so well that even when his teammates believed they had stolen the opposing team's signs, he refused to be told what was coming. He had a pretty good idea already, and it wasn't just his own swing that he knew. Once, when outfielder Al Martin joined the Padres, he started to hit the ball to the opposite field with power with a new open stance at the plate. He couldn't figure out what was going on, but Tony Gwynn knew, and showed him exactly what was happening. It had something to do with him staying on and not spinning off the ball, but I digress. I'm no Tony Gwynn after all. Tony didn't hit for a lot of power, but he hit for location better than just about anyone. When asked where he wanted his 3,000th hit to go, he said he wanted it to be a hard ground ball between shortstop and third base, or the 5-5 hole, as he called it. That's where he made his living. Gwynn hit so many balls through that hole that he even wrote 5-5 on the tongue of his shoes as a daily reminder. He didn't end up notching his iconic hit there. But hey, when you've already tallied 2,999 big league hits, you get some slack with your predictions. Gwynn could place the ball where he wanted because he had phenomenal bat control. He achieved this in part because he used a small, light bat, which allowed him to wait back as long as possible before committing to a pitch. As a result, Gwynn rarely got caught in his front foot, and hardly ever got fooled by an offering, and Gwynn was extremely serious about the bats he used, and he took very good care of them. Incredibly, in 1994, the year he hit .394, he used one bat for most of the season. Gwynn even liked the factory where his bats were made, so he could hand-pick the billets of wood. He famously could close his eyes and identify his bat from any of his teammates just by its feel. Gwynn's vision was also legendary. He claimed it was 20/15. Gwynn simply could see things that other hitters couldn't, like a pitcher gripping a split-fingered fastball in his glove. Because of his sharp eye, his quick bat, his great hands, and his prodigious preparation, Gwynn hardly ever struck out. Gwynn never struck out more than 40 times in any season. This was in large part because he might have been the best hitter who ever lived when he had 2 strikes. Gwynn finished his career batting .302 in these counts, the best mark for any player since pitch count records began being tracked. The second highest average with 2 strikes behind Gwynn, Wade Boggs, a fellow 3,000 knock member, way down at .262. During his remarkable 1994 season, Gwynn batted an otherworldly .397 in 2-strike counts. There's not been a batting average within 20 points that since. Not in regards to 2-strike counts, mind you, but period. Hall of Famer Greg Maddux faced Gwynn 107 times during their careers. How many times did the great Maddux strike Gwynn out? 0. Not a single time. Not once. In a matchup of the professors, the hitter emerged with a superior grade. Maddux liked to say that if a pitcher can change speeds, every hitter is helpless, limited by human vision, except for that bleep Tony Gwynn. Hitter number 2, Ted Williams. If any hitter in history has been as fanatical as Tony Gwynn, it's Ted Williams. Teddy Ballgame didn't have the benefits of a VCR or video, but like Gwynn, he studied pitchers and was always looking for information that could give him an edge. In his 22-year Major League career, Williams accomplished things on the field, like an insane 42 lifetime on-base percentage that gave him a legitimate claim to being the greatest hitter who ever lived, which, according to Ted himself, was his goal from childhood. His sweet left-handed swing was not only a thing of beauty to behold, it was devastating to opposing teams. He was the last batter to hit over 400, and he slugged 521 career home runs, all while missing nearly 5 full seasons in his prime while serving as a pilot in World War II and the Korean War. Ted was fueled by a relentless pursuit of perfection. In an era well before today's data-driven, video-watching athletes, Williams' scientific approach to hitting was unprecedented. He studied pitchers like they were butterflies under glass, knew their tendencies, even quizzed teammates about the pitches they had received at the plate. Williams had an exceptional grasp of the strike zone, seldom swung at a bad pitch, and would spend hours hitting. "No one ever swung a bat more than I did," he once boasted. In his hometown of San Diego, Williams would sometimes bring a bucket of balls out to the local Little League field, and spend the entire day just knocking them around the park, getting a sense of where certain balls hit certain ways would travel. He would enlist local kids to pick them all up, and then do the whole thing again. In the latter part of his career, the shift became Williams' primary opponent. He tried to hit some balls the other way, and once even bunted the ball for a single in the World Series. Still, despite complaining that the shift cost him 20 to 30 points on his lifetime batting average, the stubborn slugger would not change the hitter he had spent a lifetime becoming. He hardly modified his approach at all, electing to instead hit into the teeth of the shift, daring the defense to catch his white-hot line drives, or simply knock it over the fence. That worked too. Williams shared some of his lifetime of hitting insights in the book The Science of Hitting, which became a hitting bible of sorts for generations of sluggers that followed, including a Cincinnati Red making a bid to be the smartest hitter of his own generation. Hitter number 3, Joey Votto. Ever since he was a high school student in Toronto, Canada, Joey Votto has been a hitting fanatic and a devoted disciple of Ted Williams. He takes his well-worn copy of The Science of Hitting with him on road trips and still commonly reads it today. Votto has described his own hitting philosophy as, quote, coming up with a simple answer to a complicated event. This means having a plan built on hours of preparation, figuring out patterns of pitch usage based on the hurler and his unique pitch history. It means meticulously studying hours of video, scouting reports, and in modern times, StatCast data. It means being selective at the plate, avoiding balls even micro inches out of the strike zone. Votto's knowledge of said zone is nearly unparalleled today. It also means adjusting to pitchers who are adjusting to you. Votto's former teammate Dioner Navarro once said of him, most major leaguers make adjustments out to out. He's making them mid-at-bat. It's little wonder that Votto is already considered one of the smartest hitters in baseball history, mentioned in the same breath as greats like Tony Gwynn and Ted Williams, despite not even being retired yet. As the game has evolved in the past dozen or so years, Votto has evolved with it, from a time when pitchers were averaging in the high 80s on fastballs to now being knowledgeable about every advanced metric under the sun. Opposing teams used to try to shift to thwart the left-handed Votto. In 2017, the Chicago Cubs not only shifted the infield to the right side, but used a four-man outfield to try to stop him. Votto responded by hitting a hard shot down the right field line that eluded several of those shifted fielders. Joey Votto right now is ungodly, Cubs manager Joe Maddon remarked after the game. Today, Votto is about as close to shift-proof as you can get, even if that now is a relic of the past. His spray chart is a beautiful thing, and what's more, an evolving one. In response to his power dropping off in the 2019-2020 seasons, Votto proceeded to work on pulling more fly balls in the off-season. The result, a 2021 campaign in which he finished with the highest home run rate of his entire career. Above all else, what Votto does better than any hitter in recent history is get on base. His extremely high hitting IQ has helped him maintain a career OBP around 410, a number rarely seen in the modern game. Earlier in his career, he led the NL in OBP for 7 out of 10 years, between 2010 and 2019. In 2017, the same year he almost won his second National League MVP, he walked almost twice as many times as he struck out. Votto's goal is to be a hitter without weakness, to be unpitchable as he puts it. That's getting harder as the 39-year-old ages, including as he battles through injury to get back to the diamond in 2023, but his smart approach is keeping him relevant and still in the game, long after many hitters from his era had to put away their lumber for good. Hitter number 4, Ichiro Suzuki. Some people were skeptical when the Seattle Mariners paid $13 million for the rights to a Japanese player named Ichiro more than 2 decades ago. And when he first arrived at spring training in 2001 in Arizona, the chorus of Suzuki skeptics only grew. A slew of weak ground balls to infielders from the slim left-hander left many wondering if the Mariners had made a big mistake in signing the 27-year-old rookie. This included Ichiro's own manager, Lou Piniella, who told a Japanese journalist that if all went well, Suzuki might be a .280 hitter. During one spring training game that year, Piniella even asked Ichiro if he could drive the ball to right field. He responded by homering to right in his next at-bat. Piniella then left one of the smartest hitters ever to play this game to his own devices after that. And Ichiro responded, with 242 hits and a .350 average in his first season in the big leagues, winning both the Most Valuable Player and Rookie of the Year award, while the baseball world watched his every move in awe. 3 years later, Ichiro hit .372 and broke George Sisler's record for hits in a season with 262, a record previously thought to be untouchable. And for 10 consecutive seasons, he batted over .300 and delivered over 200 hits, setting a major league record for consecutive 200-hit seasons. Ichiro's uncanny hitting ability and intelligence began with an ability to take what the pitcher gave him, hitting the ball wherever it was pitched, while utilizing a slap-like swing that made it nearly impossible to throw him out at first base on anything but a hard ground ball right at an infielder. He not only led his generation in infield hits, but routinely racked up as many as 50 of them in a given season. Remember, his speed wasn't insane, simply above average, so this fact truly did speak to the intentional nature of his game. Ichiro could hit for power if he wanted, once stating he could have easily crushed over 40 homers a year if he had been allowed to bat .220, and sometimes demonstrated that during batting practice. But he knew as a leadoff hitter it was his job to get on base, swipe bags, which he did to the tune of over 500 in his career, and above all else, score runs. And he did all of that about as well as anybody. We will never know how many hits Ichiro could have had if he had started his career in the big leagues, but as it currently sits, over 3,000 hits in the show and over 1,000 in the MPB are, to put it mildly, nothing to sneeze at. Hitter number 5, George Brett. The last guy to bat nearly 400 in a full season, George Brett may have been one of baseball's best line drive hitters ever. The Kansas City Royals third baseman held America in thrall in the summer of 1980. That season, he seemed to hit everything he swung at, hard. Brett was hitting a good, but not historic .337 in June when he tore a ligament in his right foot, but that didn't stop him from impressing sports fans. While on the DL, Brett attended a golf tournament on crutches, greeting the participants as he approached the 18th green. When someone on the fairway hit a ball into the group putting on the green, Brett dropped his crutches, grabbed a putter, and hit the golf ball out of midair with the blade, sending it back up the fairway as onlookers stood in shock. It truly did seem like Brett could do anything in 1980. After returning from injury that July, he went on a 30-game hitting streak, reaching the 400 mark in mid-August, and as baseball fans watched on in disbelief, he remained over the 400 mark for over a month, not dropping under it until mid-September, eventually hitting .390, the closest any player has gotten to 400 since Ted Williams hit .406 in 1941. Brett also, unsurprisingly, led the league with a .454 on-base percentage that season and struck out just 22 times in 515 plate appearances. Brett's career as a hitter didn't start well. With a batting average of .205 and on the brink of being sent down to the minors in his first season in 1974, Brett started working with hitting coach Charlie Lau. The young third baseman had been a pull hitter with some big holes in his swing, but under Lau, he learned his classic drive the ball to all fields approach and saw his average reach .282 by the end of that season. In the ensuing years, Brett just got better and better. He was a throwback to an earlier time in many ways. He didn't wear batting gloves, opting for pine tar, he chewed tobacco, drank beer, stayed out of the weight room, and was one of the most competitive players in the game, and he never stopped hitting. In the end, Brett became one of only 4 players, with Hank Aaron, Willie Mays, and Stan Musial, to rack up 3,000 hits, 300 home runs, and to post a career batting average of over 300. When asked how he would like his final at-bat in the major leagues to go, he said he wanted to hit a hard ground ball to the second baseman, and run as hard as he could to, quote, show the young guys on the team that this is how the game is supposed to be played. Hitter number 6, Barry Bonds. Barry Bonds' former teammate Rich Aurelia once said of the talented slugger, the rest of us play in the major leagues. He's at a different level. And regardless of where you come down on the steroid issue, Barry Bonds was one of the all-time great hitters, and it began with his approach at the plate, not in the weight room. Bonds' intelligence in the box was always at an all-time ranking after all. Bonds' greatness began with his Williams-like patience. He waited for a pitch he could drive, even if it meant taking early count strikes. He knew he could afford to wait. No pitcher in his mind was going to get 3 strikes past both him and his catch the ball with the bat approach. That utter refusal to chase bad pitches, even when that was nearly all he was getting at one point, helped Bonds to a lifetime .444 OBP, the 6th best number ever. In 2004, the year he was walked 232 times at age 39, he had a jaw-dropping OBP of .609. Of the first 1,300 or so pitches Bonds saw that year, he swung and missed at just 49. Chew on that for a minute. One of the reasons for Barry's great eye was, well, his eyes. Dr. Bill Harrison, who tested the eyesight of big league ballplayers for 50 years, once said that Barry Bonds had no equal when it came to vision. He was the only player he ever measured who achieved 100% across each of the visual categories he tracked. Bonds' patience, combined with his chemically aided power to all fields, made him the most intimidating player of his era, and perhaps of all time. With a choked-up grip and compact swing, when Bonds got the pitch he wanted, it was a thing to behold. He had the raw power of a Babe Ruth with the mechanical precision of a Ted Williams. It was perhaps no surprise that he racked up more home runs and more walks than any other hitter in MLB history. So, what have we learned about how to hit a baseball from 6 of the most intelligent batsmen to play the game? First, you need to be seriously obsessed with hitting. Embrace its detail like your life depended on it. Every day is a chance to gather more data, improve your approach to the plate, and track opposing pitchers' tendencies. It starts with getting your pitch, and not helping the hurler with his, to know the strike zone better than the umpire. It helps to have immaculate vision and obscene hand-eye coordination. And it also helps to use the entire field, and hit it where they ain't, or just hit it well over the wall. Pete Rose had an opinion about lazy players in baseball. I don't mind lazy players, he explained, as long as they're on the other side. Accused of many terrible things, Rose was never charged with laziness. This was a man who sprinted to first base after each of his 1,566 walks, which is roughly the equivalent of sprinting a full marathon over his career. Yeah, just on walks. More than most sports, baseball demands grinding effort, as it's a true day-to-day slog through the dog days of summer. Yeah, baseball's a game that worships the grind, the hustle, the blood, the sweat, and tears. But there's still the other side of the coin. Because the sport makes huge emotional, psychological, and physical demands on the players, there are those who just can't measure up, who don't run hard to first base on less than routine grounders, who do the minimum or less in the off-season, who let their bodies go to waste. And these players irritate and annoy because in most cases they have the ability, the God-given talent, to excel in a sport where most of us have failed, despite our desperate love and desire to keep playing. Okay, Pete Rose is no role model, but perhaps the one and only thing he always did right in his career was to play the game with incredible passion. Sometimes, perhaps, too much passion. These other players, not so much. Or, in the cases we'll be examining today, barely at all. As lovers of the game, we all probably wish there was no content for this video, but nonetheless, here's our take on the laziest players in baseball history. We do want to acknowledge that, like in our worst fielder video a few weeks back, this list is slanted towards players who appeared in the last 30 years or so, largely due to the fact that the media has become far more capable of figuring out exactly how players are perceived in the clubhouse culture. There were definitely lazy players in the 1950s, for example, but word about who those players were would have never left the dugout, or clubhouse. Today, it's just so much harder to prevent the leaking of these things. Anyway, on to our vid. Batting leadoff and hardly playing left field is Delmon Young. It's easy to see why Young heads this list. Despite being the #1 pick of the 2003 draft and the #1 prospect in baseball in 2005, his 10-year career ended with a WAR of just 3.2 and an OPS plus of just 98, literally below league average. The talent was undeniable. In 37 postseason games, for example, he hit 9 bombs and drove in 22, which would translate into full season stats of 39 and 96. He truly was clutch when it counted. But Young is on this list principally for his attitude, not his lack of physical skill, which became an issue early on in his career. Only 17 when he was drafted by Tampa Bay, Young predicted he'd be in the bigs by 2005. When the Rays didn't call him up in September 05, he wasn't shy about expressing his disappointment, publicly. His temper tantrum spilled into 2006 when Young got suspended for 50 games for throwing a bat at an umpire while still playing for Durham. Yeah, throwing a bat at an ump. There's footage of it here. He still thought he belonged in the big leagues and showed up his bosses, manager Joe Madden and GM Andrew Friedman, two of the most innovative thinkers in the game. Only a fool would tell those guys how to do their job. But Delmon was, ironically, young and somewhat brash. He did finally get called up in 2006 and played every game for the Rays in 2007, finishing second in AL Rookie of the Year voting. But Friedman would end up trading him to the Twins shortly after, because, in part, Young's defense was simply well below league average, and this didn't primarily seem to be because of a lack of skill. He just didn't seem to want to give his all in the outfield, often letting fly balls drop inches in front of him and not hustling to cut off balls in the gap. This style of play went against the pitching and defense first credo the Rays were building, almost in the opposite direction in fact, necessitating a change in location it seemed. This was of course coupled with his combative ways in the clubhouse. He had a career best season in 2010, but this would be the peak of his career, when, instead of still reaching for his prime at the age of 24, Young began to decline. Injuries to his ankle and shoulders didn't help, but this more so seemed to be in large part due to the abject loss of his athleticism, accelerated by a large weight gain. He just didn't seem to be locked in mentally. By this point, he was seemingly drinking excessively, which partly explains his arrest in April 2012 for yelling anti-Semitic slurs at a group of tourists in Times Square. Yet, that same season, he was the ALCS MVP for the Tigers, who'd gotten him in a deadline deal with the Twins in 2011. Flashes of his talent still showed up at times, just without the regularity they once did. He would go on to post pedestrian big league numbers for the next 6 years, though he did somehow manage to make the playoffs every season in that span, often emerging from the minors to get hot in September. But by the age of 30, when he should have been at his peak, he was out of MLB entirely. Why? Like we mentioned above, his weight had a huge effect on his diminishing talents. It got so out of hand that the Phillies once put a clause in his contract that would pay him $600,000 to weigh in at 230 pounds 6 different times during the season. During the 2013 season, he had weighed 240, so the weight loss clause should have been a slam dunk. He just had to drop 10 pounds, with millions of dollars at his disposal and state-of-the-art exercise technology. But he never ended up getting a penny. If you sign a contract worth $91 million, would you do the required ab and core strengthening exercises required to maintain your ability to pitch? Most people would at least feel a tug of obligation to put in the effort to fulfill their end of the deal, but Cubs pitcher Carlos Zambrano was not like most people. Like Delmon Young, there was no denying the talent. Zambrano was signed out of Venezuela as a 16-year-old, and by the time he was 20, he'd reached the big leagues. A mountain of a man, Zambrano checked in at 6'4", 275. He was intimidating both on the bump and at the plate, someone who could throw a no-hitter and crush a 400-foot homer in the same contest. A Walmart version of Shohei Ohtani, if you will. The Cubs certainly thought so. In the early 2000s, the long-suffering fans of Wrigley Field finally had something to cheer for, namely Mark Pryor, Kerry Wood, and Carlos Zambrano, who in 2003 took the team to the NLCS, and then one fateful foul ball and ensuing error turned the team's fortunes on its head. In coming seasons, Pryor and Wood would get hurt, leaving Big Z as the ace of the staff. Nicknamed the Bull, he certainly was a hard worker then, at least between the lines, giving the team over 200 innings pitched every year between 2004 and 2007. He was still young, just 26 years old in 2007, when the Cubs invested almost $100 million into him. They saw Zambrano establishing himself as a true ace, a dominator, and a clubhouse leader. Instead, they got tantrums and fights with teammates. In 2007, he slugged catcher Michael Barrett in the dugout, and again in the locker room. In 2009, he got suspended for 6 games for bumping an umpire and smashing a soda dispenser. In 2010, he got into an altercation with Derek Lee for plays Lee didn't make in the field. Intense, sure, but not when it came to his own conditioning. In 2009, when Zambrano went on the DL for lower back spasms, he admitted he'd been, quote, lazy about his rehab. "My problem is, I've been lazy," Zambrano said. "There are things in life that you don't like to do, but you have to do. I don't like to do abs, but I will have to start doing my ab exercises every day and be serious about it. A truism in sports seems to be that your best player has to be your hardest worker if you truly want your team to gel." Zambrano was making $18 million in 2009, and he didn't want to do abs? Based on the ensuing year's performance, he never really did end up fulfilling that promise to take it more seriously. I guess it's no wonder that Big Z was done by the age of 31, posting ERA pluses of 81 and 91 during his last 2 seasons. But, oddly enough, in another twist of his own making, it wasn't even due to underperformance that he was out of the league entirely. He had offers. He just didn't want to play anymore. He had said as much after his 100th career win during that 2009 season, after being asked if he thought he had a chance at 300 career wins. 300? Me? Nah, I'll be out of here in 5 years. After being pressed on exactly what he meant, he responded with, "No, believe me, after this contract, I'm done. I'm serious, because I don't want to play anymore." Yeah, not exactly what you want to hear from your #1 starter. For true baseball fans, there was little better than tuning into SportsCenter in the late 2000s and watching Hanley Ramirez hit a bomb, then hearing "Say hello to my little friend." This Scarface reference helped lend majesty to the constant show that Ramirez was at the plate. He was the reason the Marlins traded Josh Beckett to the Red Sox. He was going to be A-Rod minus the steroids, a shortstop who could hit for high average and for power. Except there was one little problem. Shortstops have to be able to field the baseball, and field it well, and Ramirez simply couldn't do that. Or he could have done that, but for whatever reason, the idea of fielding just didn't appeal to him. He was 6'3", 195 pounds of pure fast twitch muscle when he broke in, another in a long line of Dominican shortstops who had the athleticism to do everything. But, despite his immense prowess at the plate, he was known for doing things in the field that really stood out in the opposite way. For example, during the 2010 season, there was the notorious kicked ball game against the D-backs, when Ramirez chased after a pop-up and somehow kicked it into left field. Instead of sprinting after it, he jogged like he was saving his energy for after the game. Yeah, he got yanked for that one. In 2011, manager Jack McKeon benched him for his lack of hustle on the field and on the bases. Teammates called him out for showing up for games at the very last minute, when he should have been arriving early for extra fielding practice. And it showed. Throughout his career, he managed to tally the 4th worst defensive runs saved total of all time, at -74, despite having more physical gifts than nearly everyone behind him, including the likes of Adam Dunn, Miguel Cabrera, and Dan Uggla. Okay, so maybe he wasn't a shortstop. Maybe a move to third was in order, especially in 2012 when the Marlins acquired Jose Reyes. Or in left field after the Red Sox signed him for $88 million in 2015, or even at first base for that matter. Even arguably the easiest defensive positions proved no match for Ramirez's inabilities in the field. In November 2015, the Red Sox spent a yacht load of $180 million on 2 players who came with huge risks, the aforementioned Hanley Ramirez and Pablo Sandoval. Both ended up being disappointing in regards to their work ethic, but in decidedly different ways. Sandoval was the beloved Kung Fu Panda when he played for the San Francisco Giants, winning 3 World Series rings in a 5-year span between 2010 and 2014. In 2012, Sandoval was named MVP of the series for hitting a cool .500, part of the reason why his career numbers in the Fall Classic are so special, a .426 average with 3 bombs and 8 RBI. The 3 bombs all came in Game 1 of the 2012 World Series, making Sandoval one of just 4 players to accomplish that feat. But if you back up to 2010, when the Giants made their first run at a title, Sandoval got just 3 ABs in the World Series because he was considered overweight and underproductive, as he had ranked as a below-average MLB hitter in that year's regular season, with just a 99 OPS+, despite him trying to get in better shape before the year began. He was benched for Juan Uribe, and in the next offseason, Sandoval decided he had to do something. He weighed 278 pounds, well above the 255 he began his career at. Sandoval went to triple threat performance in Arizona and lost 30 pounds prior to the 2011 season, the results of what the Giants organization were calling Operation Panda, and the results on the field seemed to show that Sandoval played best when he was a bit slimmer. He hit .315 with 23 homers and a .909 OPS, a big bounce back from his subpar 2010. If he hadn't missed 41 games with a broken hand, Sandoval could have possibly made a run at MVP. After losing weight before 2011, Sandoval would finish that season with an OPS plus of 155, a mark he'd never reach again. It became a springtime refrain with the Giants. Sandoval is looking to drop a few pounds in the offseason. After winning a 3rd ring in 2014, Sandoval left the Giants as a free agent for the Boston Red Sox, signing for $95 million over 5 years. The Red Sox were hoping that Sandoval would crush it in the postseason, and in the process become a Panda Bear marketing phenom in Beantown. Neither of these things came to pass. Instead, between the parts of 3 seasons, Sandoval's Red Sox OPS Plus averaged 71, 29 points below league average. It also didn't help, he was consistently putting up below average fielding metrics during this time, year in and year out. On top of all of this, he was missing time due to injury basically every season, including sitting out the entirety of the 2016 campaign. Reporting to camp earlier in that season, Sandoval claimed that the Red Sox didn't demand he'd lose weight, and further, that he didn't bother trying to lose weight or work on his fielding or anything really. At one point registering one of the most embarrassing moments in recent memory, when he literally broke his belt swinging at a pitch. When he spoke on his early days in Boston after the 2017 season, he said, and I quote, "My career has fallen into an abyss after the Red Sox deal, because I was so complacent with things that I had already accomplished. I didn't work hard in order to achieve more." It was during that 17 season he was cut entirely by the Red Sox. Ironically, it was the Giants who picked him up after this, and after successfully losing some weight, he again had 2 decent years in 2018 and 2019, when his OPS Plus was over 100. Post-Giants came a short stint with the Braves, with which he barely played in Atlanta's 2020 postseason run. By 2021, it was over, with the Panda retiring at just 34 years old. Those of course are not close to the total amount of players we could have selected for this vid, but more so the ones that stood out the most to us. However, we do believe there are a few others worthy of a somewhat dishonorable mention. Adam Dunn could crush a baseball, but he couldn't really catch one, or chase after one, or take an extra base. He was Kyle Schwarber before it was cool to be the king of 3 true outcomes. In fact, Dunn almost won the 3 true outcomes triple crown in 2012, leading the league in walks, strikeouts, but just missing out on homers with 41. He had a negative D-WAR each year of his career, stinking up the place in both left field and first base. Worse, he liked to brag he never had to work out because he was 6'6" and 285. One Yankee exec stated flatly that they wouldn't consider acquiring him for the specific reason that he was viewed as lazy. In 2006, if you'd have asked fans of the Washington Nationals about Alfonso Soriano, they would have gushed about this 40-40 specimen of speed and power. But if you asked the same question to Cubs fans in 2011, they might have said that the Fonz needed to take the first flight out of O'Hare. Why? He was still capable of hitting 30 homers and driving in 100 runs, but it was his indifference in the field that was constantly driving everyone at Wrigley up a wall. He rarely ran hard to first, even on less than routine plays, and after catchable fly balls, resulting in many of these almost certain outs dropping for hits. An elite athlete of his caliber shouldn't have had a negative 6.2 D-WAR for his career, but when it came down to it, he just didn't seem like he was trying very hard. Okay, Yankees fans, time for a stroll down memory lane. July 24th, 2018, the Trop. Yankees and the Rays are battling, and in the 9th, the game stands 7-6 Rays. The bases were loaded, and Gary Sanchez was at the plate. He had a grounder in the shift, and the Rays tried to get the out at second, with Daniel Robertson throwing to Willie Adames, who ran to the bag, but Aaron Hicks beat him there. Game tied, right? Nope. Sanchez was jogging down the line because he assumed the game would end. Adames fired to first to get Sanchez, who earlier in the game had already allowed a runner to score from second on a passed ball, because, well, Sanchez again wasn't hustling. And that pretty much sums up Sanchez's play at the time. Great talent, no hustle. Your consummate lazy player. He has, however, grown up somewhat since in his time with the Twins and the Padres, which is why we're content to leave him as an afterthought rather than a central figure of this video. Arguably the greatest player of all time, lazy? Yes and no. He could be on this list for what he did to himself during the season he turned 30, 1925. His talent was prodigious, and he still owns the record for the most innings pitched in a World Series game. Even during this time, however, it was well known that the man had appetites that he managed to keep in check until the 1925 season. Prior to spring training that year, Ruth's weight had ballooned to 256 pounds, well above his listed 215. He went to Hot Springs, Arkansas to get in shape, and all he did while there was eat, drink, and chase women, in the Ozarks version of Las Vegas. He kept on partying in the team's spring training site of St. Petersburg, where his marriage came to an end. He missed the first 7 weeks of the season due to the bellyache heard around the world. He was suspended in August for showing up late to a game. He had the worst year of his career, with just 25 homers, because of one central reason: he had gotten incredibly lazy. But he turned it around by hiring trainer Artie McGovern, and over the next 7 seasons, hit over 40 homers per campaign, and in 6 out of 7 of those seasons, his OPS Plus was over 200. But he would slip back into old habits after this period, with his career tapering off drastically in his final few campaigns. Was the Babe lazy overall? For his entire career? I'd lean towards no, but his behavior during these times makes including him in this section a slam dunk. The lazy tag trailed Robinson Cano around like a tin can tied to his cleats. It's not hard to see why. Too often, he didn't run hard to first, or made mental lapses in the field, especially early in his career. Joe Girardi actually pulled Cano from a game for a defensive lapse where he had just stood and watched the play unfold in front of him, forcing the right fielder to sprint in to grab the batted ball, which was falling fast into shallow right. Other times, he pretended like running hard to first base would lead to sudden cardiac arrest. It was baffling, because he was as smooth a player as ever manned second base, and his swing was a sight to behold. And on top of all of this, he took PEDs, which will almost certainly ruin his chance at the Hall of Fame, as well as pretty much cementing his case as a somewhat lazy player. Was this always the case? Probably not. Was this lack of hustle exaggerated by a vicious New York media? Almost certainly. But at the end of the day, this list would not be complete without the mention of Robbie Cano. Manny Machado was one of the most gifted players to ever step on a baseball field, and it's a disgrace that he's even on this list. But he has no one to blame but himself. Many times during his career, he's refused to run hard to first even when he could have been safe. Maybe that's why during the 2018 playoffs, he himself said he wasn't a Johnny Hustle type player, and then tried to defend it by, quote, clarifying that he meant he didn't fake hustle, and that hustle isn't his cup of tea. Even opposing managers have called him out for not playing hard. The record speaks for itself. He's lagged too many times, even in the World Series. Like Sanchez, however, who is his teammate ironically over the past season, he has picked up his pace of play since signing in San Diego, taking on many of the qualities of a leader. That's what saved him from a more comprehensive spot on this list, but only just barely. Being a great athlete from a young age brings with it a kind of arrogance. Coaches won't bench you because they need you to play. When you sign for big bucks, you've acquired generational wealth, and maybe the fire that's always burned bright inside you starts to burn a little less intensely. It's the rare superstar who hungers for greatness each and every day. No one accuses Aaron Judge of being lazy, or Shohei Ohtani, or Mike Trout. So why is it possible to make this video at all? Because baseball exposes the inner life of a player. Your soul is literally projected onto a diamond for all to see, especially in a social media age where every single play is scrutinized by hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. There is generally considered to be a conventionally right way to play for mere mortals, but certain stars think the rules don't apply to them, that they don't have to work on abs, or lift weights, or eat properly, or run out ground balls, or give their all to cut off fly balls in the gaps. For some of them, this might be true. However, more often than not, a lazy player leaves behind a tainted legacy that almost always swims in the realms of the what if. What if they had taken their craft more seriously, their training? The fact is, to many fans of the game, there simply shouldn't be lazy players in MLB, but at the end of the day, the fact that there is just makes the game that much more complex and human.
Huge contracts in Major League Baseball. We hear a lot of talk about the varying quality of the players receiving the biggest deals in the sport, but where exactly does each of the guys making the premium price of over $30 million a year rank in a tier list format? That's the question we're going to be attempting to answer today. Now, first, let me break down my tier list. F, of course, is for the all-out failures that honestly might not even deserve to be in the major leagues at this point, let alone making lofty salaries like this. D would be just above that, maybe a slightly below average player that's still getting paid too much, or somebody who gets injured so often they're barely on the field. C would be a guy that's performing decently, maybe not up to their exact paycheck, but enough for the deal to seem possible. Or for guys that are amazing when they're on the field, but are rarely on the field. B would be for a guy who's performing solidly, probably around what was expected of them prior to their signing. A tier is for those guys that have not only met expectations their respective franchise had for them, but have even in some cases managed to surpass them. And finally, S tier is reserved for those guys that almost certainly are on a Hall of Fame trajectory, even to this day, and are expected to remain at this level for at least the next few seasons. My numbers will be coming from SpotTrack and will include deferrals, i.e. Shohei's $70 million per year will be considered as such, instead of his cap salary of $2 million. I also do want to acknowledge that there's a particularly large free agent on the market right now that will certainly make over $30 million a year once he signs, being Juan Soto, who is also more than likely the only MLB free agent to exceed this mark going forward in this offseason, unless somebody overpays by a few million per year on somebody like Max Fried, Corbin Burns, or Willie Adames. Since Soto is estimated to make $46.2 million per year per MLBTradeRumors.com, which I have found to be pretty accurate in the past, that's where I'll put his contract value at as of now. He could easily make more than this, but since I don't know how long the Soto sweepstakes will last, I think this serves as a reasonable placeholder. So with that being explained, let's work our way from the bottom up, starting with our first $30 million man in Mookie Betts, who's making an average of $30.4 million over the course of his 12-year contract. Since he's joined LA via trade and then signed that massive extension, he's been nothing short of a perennial MVP contender, performing consistently at a Hall of Fame level, throwing up an over 900 OPS in nearly 600 games in Los Angeles with an average of over 5 WAR per season, despite missing a decent portion of a number of years due to a COVID-shortened season and a couple injuries. This has also come with a 145 OPS plus, over 30 home runs a season, as well as providing flexibility you don't normally see from other superstars in terms of positional versatility. And yeah, while he is approaching his mid-30s, he's still managing to stand out on a team with perhaps more future Hall of Famers than any other, only really ranking behind Shohei in terms of value and overall importance to the team. As you can probably guess, this is an S tier, and a very clear selection as well considering the value he provides for the cheapest $30 million plus contract on this entire list. Rafael Devers is up next with his average salary of $31.4 million in the form of a 10-year, $314 million contract. Now, this one to me is a bit tough, as we have to evaluate both what he's managed to do for the Red Sox since signing the deal in 2023 from an offensive standpoint and from an overall value standpoint. Offensively, he's performed every bit up to the standard that he had set prior to the extension, with an over 130 OPS plus, an OPS in the mid to upper 800s, and an average of over 30 home runs a year, as well as 2 top 10 MVP finishes. And yeah, he just turned 28, so he should firmly be in his prime, and will continue to be for multiple seasons after this. Those are the major positives. The negative aspect of his game is pretty obvious when you examine any kind of metric. His defense is, quite simply, terrible at third base. Over the same last 2 seasons that he racked up all that value at the plate, he's also managed to post negative 18 DRS and negative 11 fielding run value. The truth is, he probably shouldn't be a third baseman long term, as his defense has actually regressed overall since 2022, and is showing no real signs of improvement at this point. But, being as how his camp apparently told the Red Sox this offseason he doesn't want to move off the position, it seems to be an open question whether or not the Red Sox will explore other avenues for the young slugger. This, to me, knocks him down to the B tier, as while he is a true superstar, his overall value over the last 2 seasons is actually less than what Mookie put up in 2023 alone. We now have our second, more than likely future Hall of Famer up next in Manny Machado at his $31.8 million a year contract, on an 11-year deal running all the way to 2033. This one again is a bit complicated, as like I just said, Machado is more than likely a future Hall of Famer, as his current career totals of 342 home runs, near 58 WAR, and over 800 OPS, 2 Gold Gloves, a Platinum Glove, 6 All-Star appearances, 2 Silver Slugger awards, and 9 separate seasons with over 28 home runs, all have basically designated him as a guy who just needs to show up for the next few seasons to punch his ticket to Cooperstown. But since he signed this extension last season, the cracks have started to show a little bit in his game overall, as his OPS plus marks, which hadn't fallen beneath 131 since 2019, haven't managed to exceed 120 since. And his overall WAR in that time period has actually been less than his total in 2022 alone. His fielding is degrading over time to a level now where he's about average, and his hitting just isn't reaching the highs that it used to. With all this being considered, $31.8 million a season for a future Hall of Famer with the resume he has isn't in any world an overpay. This one is really close to me between A tier and B, but since I ended up putting Devers in B, who definitely has more upside at this point in his career, that's where I'm going to end up putting Machado as well. The next 2 guys are tied in their yearly salary of $32.5 million in Nolan Arenado and Corey Seager, but being as how we just talked about 2 third basemen before this, why not make it 3 in a row, and discuss another probable Hall of Famer in Arenado. Now, Nolan's fall from grace over the last 2 years has been a bit steeper than Manny's, leaking about a single WAR's worth of value more than the San Diego Star, but that isn't to say he's been horrible at the plate, as he's been about league average, with a combined OPS around 750 and about 20 homers a season. But he still has managed to excel defensively to make up for this lack of superstar production at the plate, as his fielding run value of 11 over the last 2 seasons has still managed to rank in the upper tier of fielding performance. It's also worth noting here that his 8-year, $260 million contract was signed way back in 2019, so all the value he put up from that year through 2022 has to be considered here as well. And that's no small additional total, as 2 of these years saw him place top 6 in MVP voting, win 4 Gold Gloves, and make the All-Star team 3 separate times. Yeah, his trajectory isn't great at this point, probably being the worst we've discussed so far, but still, he's an almost certain Hall of Famer with career totals that are likely to exceed 400 homers, 65 WAR, and 2,000 hits. So, as such, I'm going to consider him in the same category as Devers and Machado, in B tier. The aforementioned Seager, whose contract runs from when it was signed in 2022 all the way to 2031, totaling $325 million, is up next. Corey's case is actually an interesting example of how elite performance, even in the face of some fairly significant injury time, can still end up resulting in decent value for a contract, as even though since signing 3 years ago Corey's missed around 60 total games, he still managed to post 15.7 WAR, an average of over 5 a season, to go along with the second place MVP finish in 2023 and 3 straight All-Star appearances. Besides the injury issues, there actually isn't a real flaw in his game, I guess besides his base running, which certainly isn't good. But hey, you didn't sign him for his value there anyway. A shortstop that's capable of hitting 30 home runs a season, as he's done every single year since he arrived in Arlington, along with a near 900 OPS and 143 OPS plus. This isn't just elite production, this is Hall of Fame level production. Though, since he didn't manage to play significant consistent stretches of games from his age 24 through 27 season, he almost certainly won't make the Hall. But this doesn't take away from what he's doing every single year for the Rangers majors as of now. Yeah, he just turned 30, and he isn't the most athletically gifted shortstop, but even if this guy ends up moving to second or third, his level of offense will play, and yeah, you may only end up getting 120 games of it. But even with that being considered, it's still arguably more valuable than what Machado, Devers, or Arenado are going to give you in their 150 plus. This means, to me, he's going to be our first member of A tier. We now have perhaps the most symmetric contract in all of baseball currently, with Carlos Correa making $33.333 million a year over the course of his 6-year, $200 million deal that he signed in 2023. It's certainly been an uneven road for Correa since, as he went from his worst full season in the first year of the deal with just 1.4 WAR through 135 games and career worst numbers offensively across the board, to arguably one of his best campaigns on a rate basis in only about half a season's worth of contests in 2024. This included an OPS over 900 and an OPS plus over 150, an all-star appearance, and his highest home run rate since 2021, along with his usual standout defense. The problem is, 86 games is just not enough when you're paying the guy the equivalent combined salaries of Marcell Ozuna and Ketel Marte. He had managed to stay relatively healthy for a few years before this, but even still, at this point it seems to be anyone's guess what kind of Carlos Correa you're going to get year to year. Will it be the superstar from 2021 that led the AL in position player WAR? The really good player in 2022 that was only a step below this? The underperformer of 2023 that was nothing short of a disappointment? Or the insane level of production put up over an abbreviated campaign in 2024? This kind of uncertainty, to me, makes him our fourth member of the B tier, as while he might have more upside than any of the rest of the guys in there right now, he also might play half the games they do. And the fact that he just turned 30 as a tall shortstop probably isn't going to help with his aging curve, and he certainly doesn't have the offensive profile on a year-to-year basis that somebody like Seager has. Francisco Lindor takes us beyond the $34 million a year mark, with his 10-year deal being signed back in 2022 and running through 2031. At this point, it seems hilarious that there were fans back when he signed his contract who viewed it as a massive overpay. But you have to remember that his 2021 certainly wasn't anything to write home about, as it actually ended up being his worst full season campaign of his career up to that point. But the Hall of Fame level player that Mets management believed was in there has certainly shown up since he put his name on the dotted line, as he's basically gotten better every single season since 22. With his WAR climbing from 5.6 to 6 to 7, his OPS going from 788 to 806 to 844, his slugging percentage climbing over 50 points in that period, his on-base percentage steadily rising, his stolen base numbers rising to levels that they had never been in the past, all while throwing an S-tier defense that ranks among the best in the sport regardless of position. Frankie certainly has become one of the best overall players in Major League Baseball, as evidenced by the fact he's finished top 10 in MVP voting over the last 3 years as well, culminating with a second place finish in 2024 while also carrying the Mets in some of the biggest moments of their season. This is a slam dunk S tier for me, as I firmly believe he will someday be a Hall of Famer barring any major injuries. And where things stand now, because of his contract, he'll go in as a Met. We now come to the first real stinker of the video, an abhorrent stain on Major League Baseball as a whole, the 7-year, $245 million contract handed out to Anthony Rendon, by who else but the Angels, coming in at an absurd $35 million a year. Pretty much everyone in the baseball space has made some video on Rendon over the last few seasons, so I'm not going to get too much into the weeds here on his underperformance, but perhaps the most succinct way I could put it is that his highest totals since he landed in Anaheim in home runs, WAR, walks, and total extra base hits all came in the COVID-shortened season of 2020. Yeah, let that sink in for a second. The guy who had posted a 126 OPS plus with the Nationals for 7 seasons has managed to just under 100 mark since that year, and has only managed to knock 2 home runs in the last 2 seasons combined, all while playing exactly 100 games in that time span. If you want to make matters worse, you can also throw in some of the unsavory things he said along the way as well, but I'm just going to end our misery here with the obvious statement that this is an F-tier contract, and one of the most disappointing contracts in the history of sports, let alone baseball. I guess it's only fitting that the next guy up would be another Angel, but with this one being a much sadder case in Mike Trout, who was once thought to be on track for one of the greatest careers in the history of Major League Baseball. The guy making $35.5 million a year from 2019 to 2030 had managed to post league-leading totals in value every single year from 2012 through 2016, and be among the league leaders the next 2 seasons as well, despite missing a handful of games. But since a really good first year of the deal when he led Major League Baseball in a number of rate stats while also blasting 45 home runs and winning his 3rd career MVP, he hasn't managed to stay remotely healthy, playing in more than 82 games in a season only once while tallying less WAR since 2020 than he put up in 2017 and 2018 combined. It's not like his performance is falling off a cliff either. He's still an elite player when he manages to be on the field, as evidenced by his 140 OPS plus in just 29 games last year. But I simply can't designate this as a good contract, considering the fact that he's making more than Lindor while routinely playing in a third of the games that he does, and the fact that he's only had 1 elite nearly full season since he signed the deal. This means I'm going to have to take his A to at times S tier level production that he's managed to post on a rate basis and combine it with his F level ability to stay on the field, splitting the difference at an extremely painful C tier ranking. Remarkably, we have our first pitcher of the list now in Gerrit Cole, who signed a 9-year, $324 million contract back in 2020, paying him on average exactly $36 million a year. Since he's arrived in New York, Cole has been nothing short of a true ace, finishing top 10 in Cy Young voting every single year besides his partial campaign in 2024, while throwing up a 1.34 ERA+, 3.12 ERA, and a strikeout rate of nearly 11. He was even arguably the best pitcher in all of baseball in 2023 when he led the league in total WAR, ERA, innings pitched, shutouts, ERA+, WHIP, and hits per 9. At this point, it seems like he's on a pretty solid Hall of Fame trajectory considering the shifting landscape for what a Hall of Fame pitcher is going to have to accomplish in terms of counting stats. And that, combined with the fact that starting pitching cost is only going up as the years go on, lands this in S tier for me, even if it certainly is overall a little weaker than the deals signed by both Betts and Lindor. Fresh off our first pitcher, we have our second, and our most recent free agent contract as well, being Blake Snell's 5-year, $182 million contract signed by the Dodgers this offseason, giving him an average salary of $36.4 million. Now, as with any contract that signed this recently, it's hard to grade, as he actually doesn't even have a single start in LA as of now, but I do think it's possible to examine the hypothetical value of this deal based on what he's accomplished in the past, with the negative and positive aspect of his games overall being considered. Starting first with the positives, there are quite a few, as we have the fact that he's posted 2 of the most dominant 180-inning seasons in recent baseball history, with his ERA plus marks of 217 and 187 in 2018 and 2023 representing obviously league-leading totals, along with a combined ERA around 2 and over 450 strikeouts. This proves, at his best, Snell's probably a top 3 pitcher in baseball, and on any given night could even be its most dominant. However, it's all the in-between those years, as well as last season, that gives me a little bit of pause when examining a deal that is over double the annual salary of a guy like Logan Webb. In those seasons between 2018 and 2023, Snell never managed to post an ERA below 3.20, and he only managed to make more than 24 starts in a season once, in what was arguably his worst career season ever in 2021. Yeah, 2024 was good when we examined rate stats like a career-high 12.5 Ks per 9 and a relatively low walk rate of under 4 for him, but the truth is, some of his other numbers weren't fantastic, as his ERA climbed over 3 and his ERA plus sagged below 130. Now, I'm not trying to say that Blake Snell isn't a really good pitcher. He certainly is, but when we compare this to the contracts of other guys that have similar career numbers to him, it certainly seems like LA could be in for a bit of an overpay. With that being said, I do understand there's also a lot of upside here, being what we know he's capable of at his best, so I'm going to place this in B tier, with the potential for a swing wildly between tiers in the coming seasons. We now come to who I'd like to refer to as the Mike Trout of pitching, Jacob deGrom, and his $37 million a year contract that spans 5 seasons from 2023 to 2027. Just as with Trout, the issue with deGrom has never been performance, as since he arrived in Arlington in 2023, he's managed to post an around 2 ERA and a 177 ERA+. The problem is, this has come in just 41 total innings pitched, including missing all of the Rangers' 2023 World Series run, and making just 3 starts last season towards the end of the year. Now, there is one big difference here between Mike and Jacob though. When Anaheim signed their superstar outfielder to the big deal they did back in 2019, he had managed to stay mostly healthy in every single season before that besides 2017, and even since has still managed to take nearly 1,300 at-bats, albeit in fractured portions of seasons. The Mets' former ace, however, in the 3 seasons leading up to his free agency, had only managed to pitch a combined total of around 220 innings, though I will acknowledge that 2020 was also COVID-shortened. This means the Rangers knew they were getting a guy in his mid-30s who hadn't managed to stay healthy for years, and still signed him to one of the highest contracts in Major League Baseball today in terms of AAV. If he can somehow manage to throw 150 innings plus every year from 2025 through 2027, maybe this contract will look a bit better by its end. But, being as how that seems extremely unlikely, and he still is making $2 million a year more than Trout, I'm going to have to give him a slightly worse designation here, as our first member of the D tier. Aaron Judge brings us into our top 3 of actual contracts with his $40 million a year salary spread out over the course of 9 years, starting in 2024. In my opinion, Judge has not only been one of the best New York Yankees in their hallowed history, but one of the best hitters in Major League Baseball overall, as his career OPS of over 1,000 in nearly 1,000 career games, insane 173 OPS plus, and over 51 home runs per 162 games, all have him on a Hall of Fame level trajectory, despite the fact that he didn't even end up taking regular at-bats in the major leagues until his 2017 season, when he was 25 years old, and has dealt with some major injury issues along the way up until about 2021. Are there still concerns over those injuries going forward? Sure, to some degree, as anybody who's 6'7" and playing the outfield will always concern you on this front, but besides a turf toe injury that certainly seemed to be a freak accident in 2023, Judge has managed to play essentially full seasons every year since that aforementioned 2021. 2024 was even his best season overall, with a 10.8 WAR, 58 home runs, a 1,159 OPS, and a career-high 322 batting average. Yeah, this guy was in contention for the Triple Crown in the same year he hit nearly 60 home runs. The postseason stuff was horrible, don't get me wrong, but that certainly doesn't mitigate his value to the point where he would be anything less than an S tier, as one of the true faces of Major League Baseball for at least the foreseeable future. At number 2, we have Zack Wheeler of the Phillies, who was making $42 million a year for 3 seasons from 2025 through 2027. Since Wheeler has arrived in Philadelphia in 2020, he's actually been in a somewhat under-the-radar fashion among the best pitchers in Major League Baseball, routinely finishing top 10 in Cy Young voting while even managing to place top 20 in MVP voting twice. This includes a career Philly ERA of just under 2 and an ERA plus of 142. 2024 was perhaps the best season of all of them, as his 200 innings pitched of 2.57 ERA baseball was complemented by 224 strikeouts and a league-leading 0.96 whip and 6.3 hits per 9. If you want any more fuel to the fire that this is a good signing, look no further than his postseason numbers, as in just under 70 innings pitched, he's managed an ERA of just over 2, with 77 strikeouts and a whip of 0.73. Yeah, I know it seems like a lot of money, especially for a guy who's going to be 35 years old come opening day, but the fact remains, this is a top 5 starting pitcher in all of Major League Baseball, arguably top 3, and he's managed to stay mostly healthy every single season since 2018. This, combined with the fact that it's not even that long of a deal, which mitigates its potential downside, has to place this in the S tier for me, as while Wheeler almost certainly won't be a Hall of Famer someday, he has been pitching like one since he arrived in Philadelphia. We now come to the unofficial segment of this video, where I'm going to talk about the estimated contract that will more than likely be signed by Juan Soto in the next 2 months. Now, MLB Trade Rumors predicts his salary to be somewhere in the neighborhood of $46 million over the course of roughly 13 years. Now, I personally think it's going to be more than that in terms of years and average annual value, but I think we can agree that $46 million a year, or roughly around that, is probably the minimum, so we're just going to pin it at that number. What exactly has he done to earn this? Well, how about accomplishing more before the age of 26 than most players will in their entire career, putting up incredible totals of 201 home runs, 36.4 WAR, 5 top 10 MVP finishes, and never having a single year with an under 400 OBP, including his first year, when he was just 19 years old. Crazy enough, he's coming off of what was probably his best full season ever in 2024, when he set career highs in home runs at 41, OPS plus at 178, and WAR at 7.9. The sky's the limit for somebody who could reasonably someday join the 600 home run club, combined with the on-base skills of a prime Joey Votto. Yeah, defensively he's pretty terrible and he's not going to be a good base runner, but with that kind of past and potential future production at the plate, it's pretty clear that whatever deal he ends up signing will firmly slot into the S tier category until proven otherwise. Again, I want to repeat, this guy's going to be under 27 years old when he makes his debut for whatever team signs him in 2025. We round out our list with the highest paid player in Major League Baseball and one of overall the highest paid players in sports history in Shohei Ohtani and his $70 million a year contract. Yeah, that's almost double the next closest on the books as of now, being Zack Wheeler. How could a player even possibly pay back the value of a contract this size? What would they have to do on the field and off to make this a good investment for their team? Well, how about posting the first 50-50 season in the history of Major League Baseball, while also throwing up league-leading totals in home runs, RBI, on-base percentage, slugging percentage, OPS plus, and total WAR, all while playing the entire year as a DH. Combined with his magnetic draw that basically attracts a sellout everywhere he and the Dodgers play, while exposing the team to an entirely new market in Japan, I would say that it's solidly worth it. And I'm just talking about his 2024, by the way, during which he pitched exactly 0 innings, a number he will most certainly eclipse next season. This guy was the first DH-only player to win an MVP while recovering from Tommy John surgery. What will he do next? Combine a 60 home run season with a sub-3 ERA, strike out 200 batters while notching 200 hits in the same season, post an ERA plus and OPS plus north of 170? The sky truly is the limit for the Dodgers' future Hall of Famer, who will reside firmly in our S tier for what I hope to be many years to come.
Dodgers legend Sandy Koufax once said that pitching is the art of instilling fear. And it's true. Some of the best pitchers ever to take the mound have also been the best at scaring the hell out of any batter who stepped in against them. And there's not much more horrifying in sports than an intimidating pitcher with elite stuff, as at times it seems like there's an equal chance they could strike you out or just outright put you into an eternal slumber with one wild pitch.
What's it like to face some of these guys? Someone once said of another Dodgers ace, the opposing Don Drysdale, that he would consider an intentional walk a waste of 3 pitches. If he wants to put you on base, he can hit you with 1. Slugger Oscar Gamble once said that a good game against the fearsome Nolan Ryan was going 0 for 4 and not getting hit in the head. Hank Aaron, one of the best hitters of all time, didn't mix words about what it was like to square off against the intimidating Bob Gibson. Don't stare at him, don't smile at him, don't talk to him, Aaron said. He doesn't like it. You don't dig in against Bob Gibson. He'll knock you down. He'd knock down his own grandmother if she dared to challenge him. And with that cold as heck line, we're brought to our topic of today, examining some of the scariest pitchers in baseball history. So step right up, but don't get too comfortable in that box. Pitcher number 1, Randy Johnson. Let's start with the towering and glowering Johnson. What made the big unit so intimidating? Let's start with the big part. Few hurlers have ever stood out so much on a baseball mound as Johnson. When the 6'10" southpaw debuted at the Montreal Expos in 1988, he became the tallest player in Major League history at the time. But it wasn't just his height that made his presence on the mound so intimidating. It was the scowl, the brooding countenance, the acne scars, the mustache, and yes, the iconic mullet. And Johnson wasn't just physically imposing, he was also bringing it. Johnson's triple-digit fastball seemed even faster than it was because of how long his stride to the plate was. It could at times feel like he was just handing the ball to the catcher. Add to that a filthy, exploding slider and a nearly sidearm delivery, and the lengthy lefty appeared almost unhittable most of the time. You know what else was so intimidating? His sometimes total lack of control. In his first season with the Expos, he walked as many men as he struck out, and he continued to have major control issues in his first few seasons with the Seattle Mariners. Young Randy was wild, erratic, inconsistent, and all the more imposing as a result. Teammates refused to stand in against him in bullpen sessions. A department store mannequin had to be added to the payroll in their place. Johnson at times also had trouble controlling something else, his temper. When things weren't going well on the mound for the big left-hander, it was wise to give him a wide berth in the dugout and let him take out his rage on other things, like bat racks and water coolers. And even once Johnson learned to control his pitches better later in his career, the looming possibility that he could lose control at any moment hung over the batter's box like a dark cloud, terrifying hitters. If Johnson let go of a fastball over your head, as he did to John Kruk at the 1993 All-Star Game, it didn't really matter if it was intentional or accidental. He was in your head, and the at-bat was pretty much over. Kruk, for one, didn't stand a chance after his intimidation. Johnson's total dominance and intimidating presence became almost laughable at times, as when his former Expos teammate Larry Walker encountered his own John Kruk moment at the 1997 All-Star Game, and promptly turned his helmet around and marched to the other batter's box. What could you do in the face of such an imposing threat but try to laugh? What could you do when Johnson's fastball even proved lethal, as they did when a poor dove chose to fly in front of home plate during 2001 spring training game? Johnson managed to stretch his imposing career over 22 seasons, striking fear into the hearts of hitters en route to 303 career victories and 4,875 strikeouts. Few pitchers have reigned over the game for so long, and until they were as old as the big unit was when he finally hung up his cleats. Pitcher number 2, Bob Gibson. Perhaps no hurler ever stared down batters quite like Bob Gibson. The St. Louis Cardinals ace had a ferocity that only a few like Johnson have ever come close to equaling on the mound. Gibson didn't just glare at hitters, he scowled at them, and the batters didn't just respect him, they outright feared him. That's because Gibson had a bite every bit as menacing as his bark. When he wound up, the 6'2" right-hander swung his entire body around before exploding at the batter and ending in his distinctive follow-through, hurling fastballs that would more than likely register in the mid-90s today. And what's more, hitters knew that it was just as likely to go at their head as paint the outside corner. Gibson brought an intense competitive fire to the mound every time he pitched. He had joined the Cardinals just a decade after Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier, and there was still very few black pitchers in the big leagues. As Gibson put it himself, failure wasn't an option. Gibson's fire-fueled performances that led him to dominate the National League for a decade. The 60s were a hurler's paradise thanks to the high pitching mounds and cavernous fields, and no one leveraged the advantage better than Gibson. It was a time when pitchers owned the inside part of the plate, considered it their personal property. In his autobiography, Gibson said that he threw 9 different pitches after all. 2 different fastballs, 2 sliders, a curve, a changeup, knockdown, brushback, and hit batsmen. Ouch. But Gibson's reputation for throwing at batters belied the amount he actually did it. He never led the league in HBPs and struck only 102 batters in his 17-year career, about 6 per season. Clearly the ones he did hit made an impression, and the legend just grew and grew. Batters often said that Gibson may not have actually hit that many, but he would constantly knock them down intentionally. Gibson later called that ridiculous. He said, "If I threw at a batter, I hit him." Part of Gibson's ferocious mystique came from his utter unwillingness to engage with the enemy. He never shook hands with an opponent, never fraternized. Hell, he wouldn't say a word to his own teammates on days he pitched. He was tough as nails and would never show any weakness. Once, in 1967, Pirates slugger Roberto Clemente lined a pitch back at Gibson. It broke his fibula. Gibson stayed in the game long enough to pitch to 3 more Pirates hitters. Bob's competitiveness helped him win 251 games and 2 Cy Youngs while striking out 3,117. In 1968, he won the National League MVP when he finished with a mind-boggling 1.12 ERA, the modern record. In 9 career World Series starts, he threw 8 complete games, including a 10-inning victory over the New York Yankees. It simply wasn't fair to be that intimidating and that good. When Major League Baseball lowered the mound in 1969 and reduced the height of the strike zone from a batter's armpit to the jersey letters, the changes were known simply as the Gibson rules. Though small in stature at just 5'11" and 170 pounds, Pedro Martinez became one of the most imposing power pitchers in the history of the game. With 3 world-class pitches, a tailing high 90s fastball, a wicked curve, and a nasty change, Martinez could practically toy with hitters. And beyond his 3 stellar offerings, Martinez also enjoyed elite control, command, and confidence. His willingness to come inside could also leave opposing hitters often tasting dirt. And make no mistake, despite his elite movement, this was purely intentional. "I'm not afraid of hitting anyone," he once said, "because I can put the ball where I want to." And sometimes where he wanted to put it was in your ear. In his first few years in the big leagues in Montreal, Martinez earned the reputation as a headhunter. They called him Senior Plunk. Pedro had a knack for hitting batters during tension-filled moments as well, touching off countless bench-clearing brawls. The rail-thin right-hander was sometimes downright proud of this intimidating tactic. After Yankees ace Roger Clemens once drilled his Red Sox teammate Kevin Millar, Martinez, watching from the dugout, said he was going to, quote, file that at the top of his to-do list. What exactly was this new item on his list? Plunking both Derek Jeter and Alfonso Soriano in response the next time he faced them. Both players had to leave early to have x-rays taken. Martinez joked to teammates, "At least I gave them a discount at an ambulance. They both got to go in the same one." That's one of the coldest lines I've ever heard. At times, Senior Plunk's competitive fire got the best of him, like in the 2003 ALCS. After Martinez threw behind Yankees outfielder Kareem Garcia, Roger Clemens retaliated by throwing at Red Sox slugger Manny Ramirez. When the benches cleared, the 32-year-old Martinez grabbed the Yankees' 72-year-old bench coach Don Zimmer in a baseball takedown that would live in infamy. Martinez later called it the only thing he would like to erase from his career. But with a repertoire that included such dazzling stuff as well as his cutthroat intimidation, it is little wonder that the Dominican pitcher won 219 games and 3 Cy Youngs over his 18 seasons, putting up over 3,000 Ks while pitching predominantly in an era in which oversized sluggers like Mark McGwire, Barry Bonds, and Sammy Sosa were dominating baseball. To some, his prime years in the 90s are even considered the best in the history of baseball. Pitcher number 4, Sandy Koufax. Pedro Martinez's total dominance over his rivals was often compared to Sandy Koufax's reign over the National League during the 60s. For 6 years, the left-handed Los Angeles Dodger pitched like a man possessed, or from another planet, making big league hitters look like minor leaguers. Koufax was so dominant that the Phillies once called a game for rain where there were only a few sprinkles, just to avoid facing him. Hall of Famer Orlando Cepeda said that Koufax's triple-digit fastball was so fast and so noisy it scared you. And just like our other imposing left-hander, Randy Johnson, Koufax struggled to control it early in his career. In his first 6 seasons with the Dodgers, Koufax walked over 5 batters per 9 4 times, and constantly threw wild pitches. He hit so many batters one spring training that one teammate complained taking batting practice against him was like playing Russian roulette with 5 bullets. But Koufax's blazing fastball wasn't even his best pitch. After all, his devastating curveball was undoubtedly among the best offerings ever thrown. We don't tend to think of curveballs as intimidating, but in Koufax's case, it was perhaps even more paralyzing to batters than his heater. It had a sharp, sudden break, as if an invisible hand had given it a tap right before home plate. Even the best hitters were left stunned in silence as it left them frozen in the box. In Game 1 of the 1963 World Series, Koufax faced no less than the Yankee slugger Mickey Mantle. The book on Mantle was to avoid throwing curveballs anywhere near the plate. Even if he was fooled, he was so strong and so good at keeping his hands back that he could still crush them. And so, in his first showdown against Mantle, Koufax threw him only fastballs and struck him out. When Mantle came up a second time, Koufax again got 2 strikes on fastballs. At this point, everyone in the ballpark, including Mantle and Koufax's catcher, was thinking fastball. Koufax shook off the fastball signal twice, and then he uncorked the pitch that he'd been told never to throw Mantle. The pitch came in at eye level, and then right before it reached home, it just dove, crossing at Mantle's knees.
Mantle faces Koufax in the second inning and is called out on strike. Mickey obviously is chagrined.
Mantle flinched and never moved his bat. Strike 3. Mantle just stood there and then turned to the catcher and said, "How the bleep is anybody supposed to hit that bleep?" Stories like that just surround Koufax. Once when he was 45 years old and had been retired for years, he was pitching batting practice to the legendary Dodger lineup of the 1980s, including the likes of Dusty Baker, Steve Garvey, and Ron Cey. One of the hitters asked the old man to throw his curveball. Koufax indulged him. The curve dropped like a stone through water. He couldn't touch it. He told his laughing teammates that they should try hitting it. And one after another, some of the best hitters in baseball, who know a curveball is coming, stepped up to the plate against the 45-year-old. Not a one of them could hit it. Koufax sadly retired after the 1966 season at just age 30 after battling constant pain and injuries, including an arthritic elbow. One marvels at the stats he could have put up if he had played longer. Hall of Famer Hank Aaron would go on to say that the best thing about Koufax's retirement was that he no longer had to face him. Pitcher number 5, Nolan Ryan. There's never been a pitcher quite like Nolan Ryan. With his high leg kick and insane stride length, Ryan felt like he was right on top of opposing hitters before he even let go of the pitch, making his eventual 100-mile-per-hour plus fastball look even faster than it was. As a result, he was absolutely horrifying to face. Thanks to that fastball and his sick curve, he struck out more batters than any hurler ever has, and probably ever will. He threw more no-hitters, pitched more innings, threw more pitches, and through all of it, Ryan never gave in to a hitter, never took a pitch off. Even down to the count, he was still trying to throw unhittable pitches. He wanted to strike out every batter he faced and make them look bad in doing it. Legendary pitching coach Dave Duncan once said, "A guy like Ryan doesn't just get you out, he embarrasses you." Thanks to his ferocity, the typical Nolan Ryan game featured a lot of strikeouts, a lot of walks, and very few hits. Ryan not only struck out the most hitters ever, he walked the most. 2,795 in his career, more than 50% more than Steve Carlton, the next player on the list. The Ryan Express also threw the most wild pitches, and hit 158 batters during his career. His lack of control, as evidenced by the fact that he walked more than 100 batters in a season 11 times, only served to intimidate hitters more. And when Ryan was truly on, batters had pretty much no chance. Once, when Ryan was 1 out from one of his 7 no-hitters, Detroit Tigers slugger Norm Cash walked up to the plate, not with a bat, but with the wooden table leg that had been ripped off a table in the Tiger clubhouse. "Check his bat," Ryan shouted from the mound at the home plate umpire, who, after a good laugh, asked Cash to grab a real bat. Cash responded, "Why? I'm not going to get hit anyway." And he didn't. Cash got a real bat, popped up, and Ryan had his no-hitter. Perhaps Ryan's single most intimidating moment came right at the tail end of his career. It was a hot August day in Texas in 1993. Robin Ventura, the White Sox 26-year-old all-star third baseman, strode to the plate against the 46-year-old Ryan. He had already singled against Ryan in the game. Nolan brought the heat up and in, beating young Robin. Ventura dropped his bat, tossed his helmet, and charged the mound. Big mistake. Ryan hog-tied the young whippersnapper and hammered him with a volley of punches to the head, what was later called the Texas haircut. The whole ordeal made it clear yet again that there are at least 2 things you don't mess with: Texas and Nolan Ryan. Pitcher number 6, Aroldis Chapman. He's been called the Cuban Missile, the Sultan of Swift, the Viceroy of Velocity. He is officially the hardest throwing pitcher ever. Aroldis Chapman, at 6'6", is one menacing presence on the mound. And when you throw in some control issues, as well as a suspension for abuse he incurred back in 2016, you really do have a bona fide boogeyman. Chapman's left arm was blessed by the gods. He and it burst onto the scene with the Cincinnati Reds in 2010, and since then, Chapman has been one of the most electric and erratic closers in the big leagues. Did I mention he was once clocked at 105.1 miles per hour in one of his first big league games? Yeah, on September 24th, 2010, this happened. The pitch was the fastest ever recorded in MLB history, and it almost beat Andrew McCutchen. Chapman later hit 105 again with the Yankees in 2016. Pitches like that don't need a PR team. They're pretty much unhittable and can't help but intimidate batters, even the best in the world. So, what's it like to see a 105-mile-per-hour fastball? Slugger Andrew McCutchen said that trying to hit Chapman's fastball is like trying to catch a fly, not a fly ball, an insect, like Mr. Miyagi. As with Randy Johnson and Sandy Koufax, facing Chapman is even more of a nightmare for lefties. When once asked what it was like to face Chapman from the left-handed batter's box, Matt Carpenter said, "Scary, just scary. He coils up like a snake and he throws 100 miles an hour. And it just seems like it's going to be right by your face." And it might be. And in case anyone ever forgot what he's capable of, Chapman's got it tattooed on his left wrist, where 105.1 miles per hour is inked below a flame-tailed fastball. And for those of you going to comment that he's washed up today, his up to 104 mile per hour heaters this year might just make you want to rethink those statements. Lastly, no list of intimidating heroes would be complete without a few honorable mentions. First up, Sam McDowell. The 6'5" left-hander had a devastating fastball and lived hard and fast, both on the field and off. On the hill, he claimed 5 straight strikeout titles from 1965 to 1970, twice topping 300 Ks. Off the field, he described himself as the biggest, most hopeless, and most violent drunk in baseball. This erraticness, along with his legendary heat and sometimes suspect command, combined to make him one of the most feared fireballers in the game's history. During the late 70s, Astros ace J.R. Richard was one of the most dominant pitchers in the majors. Not only was Richard 6'8" and 220 pounds, looking more like a center than a pitcher, he could throw his fastball over 100 and his slider in the mid-90s, at a time when this was extremely rare. Like Nolan Ryan, he believed in letting it fly all the time, with little regard to where it was going. He also had something of a reputation as a headhunter. Unfortunately, his career was cut short by a stroke in 1980, just as he was really coming into his own, but nonetheless, he left behind a hell of a legacy, especially in the minds of the hitters he faced at the time. Nicknamed the Mad Hungarian for his madman appearance and on-the-mound persona, Al Hrabosky turned batter intimidation into performance art during his 12 major league seasons. He would jaw with umpires, hitters, including those on deck, and could be counted on for a good beanball and swing brawl at least a couple times per season. And finally, the Rocket, Roger Clemens. With over 4,000 career Ks and 300 wins, while spending a decent portion of his career pumped up on roids, his reputation really did precede him. Aside from his thick body and menacing stare, Clemens was a master of intimidation with his actions as well. Who can forget this moment from the 2000 World Series? Not content to just shatter Mike Piazza's bat with an inside heater, Clemens picked up the barrel and fired it at the Mets catcher. Somehow he wasn't ejected from the game. Maybe even that day's umpire was too scared to take him on. So what have we learned from baseball's most fearsome pitchers about how to intimidate hitters? First, it helps to have a dynamite fastball. It's sometimes better if it's not at all clear where it's going. At times, it's even more scary if you know where it's going and that presumed destination is at you. Sometimes a filthy off-speed pitch can be equally daunting, or a simulated psychotic episode, or hey, how about a real one? All these combine to give us our formula for how to be an intimidating pitcher in the annals of baseball history.
Every baseball player fears its rival, the Opher, a horrible beast that devours batting averages and destroys the confidence of even the greatest players. When Willie Mays began his career with an 0-for-20, he told manager Leo Durocher to send him back down to the minors. Durocher did no such thing, and Mays got his first hit soon after, a homer off of future Hall of Famer Warren Spahn. Hitless streaks are just part of the game. Baseball largely appeals to the mathematically minded because statistics can serve up some crazy storylines, such as in 1941, when Joe DiMaggio was mired in a god-awful 0-for-20 slump of his own, the kind where players start to worry that they've been space jammed. But Joltin' Joe managed to end the streak there, and then kept on going, until he'd hit in 56 games in a row. Talk about going from ice cold to red hot. But Joltin' Joe wasn't done. After he went hitless in game 57, he ran off another 16 in a row. So his 0-for-20 then morphed into hits in 72 out of 73 games. And in a microcosm, that's how statistics in baseball work. It's an endless regression towards the mean. Cold streaks follow hot streaks, and vice versa. Getting too fixated on small sample sizes can distort the larger picture of a player. Hall of Famer Nyjer Morgan had 2 streaks where he went 0-for-30, but those streaks mean nothing when weighed against the totality of his amazing career. At the end of the day, the best players just go cold less than everyone else, but they do still go cold. The advent of StatCast has only added another grueling dimension to the horror of the hitless streak. Thanks to the miracle of cloud-based computing, we now know much more about a batted ball than ever before. For ages, baseball players have known that they're hitting into some bad luck, but eventually the bloops would fall in and things would even out. Today, they know with a fairly higher degree of certainty whether or not this is actually true. So, with all of that in mind, who've been the victims of the most punishing hitless streaks in baseball history, and what became of these players afterwards? Player 1, Chris Davis. It takes some real mental gymnastics to get your head around this stat. 0-for-54. At first, it just doesn't seem possible that a major league hitter could go to the plate for basically 17 straight games and not get even a single hit, even on accident. No little dribbler, no Texas leaguer, no seeing eye single, no excuse me dink to the opposite field. Hits come in all shapes and sizes, and while some are truly majestic, plenty are meh, even downright ugly, but they all count the same in the scorebook. Try telling that to Chris Davis, owner of the worst offer in the history of Major League Baseball. Somehow, some way, for 62 straight plate appearances, he didn't scratch out even a slow roller. Nothing. Nada. Simple probability tells you this is impossible. You can't toss 54 heads in a row, for example. I mean, I guess you can, but it might take years. The chances of doing so is 1 in a quadrillion. Davis sports a career batting average of .233, meaning that he got roughly 23 hits every 100 ABs. By this logic, he should have gotten around 12 hits during his epic 0-for-54 in 2018 through 2019. Even if we take his horrible stat averages from his later career, that still should have been at least 7 to 9 hits. The fact is, Davis did earn those hits. Well, sorta. If you watch Foolish Baseball's in-depth video on Davis's streak, you'll quickly realize that he hit around 12 or so balls hard enough to get hits off of them. The expected batting averages on those knocks range from 580 to over 900. Let me repeat, Davis hit one ball that 9 out of 10 times, based on exit velo and launch angle, becomes an MLB base knock. His got caught. Why? Well, in large part because of the shift. RIP. No one in MLB was more heavily shifted than Davis at the time, and no one in MLB struggled to hit more against it. And it's not like the over 54 came out of nowhere. In 2018, when his hitless streak began, Davis would set another dubious record, the lowest season batting average of any player eligible for the batting title at 168. He also had a K rate of 41% that season, and an offensive WAR of -2.6. Pretty grim numbers for someone earning $23 million. To be fair, Chris Davis in 2012 hit 33 homers and drove an 85 while making $488,000, and he still led the O's into the playoffs. No one was screaming about him being underpaid then, or the next season when he led the majors in homers for $3.3 million. Just like no one backed him up when in 2013, baseball stopped allowing him to take Adderall to treat his ADHD, something he'd done since 2008. In some ways, his career never fully recovered from the stigma of a 25-game suspension he got in 2014. It wasn't fair that Davis got punished for treating a medical condition with a treatment prescribed by his doctor. We ended up making a whole video on that subject, as a matter of fact. But many things in life aren't fair, and no one knows this better than Chris Davis. On April 12, 2019, he singled off of Rick Porcello. The start of a hot streak? Fat chance. Davis ended 2019 hitting 179 with 12 homers and an OPS plus of 59. He retired to a sad whimper after the 2020 season, though he is still set to earn $3.5 million a year for over a decade from now in deferred payments from his huge 2016 contract. Now, that's another streak worth examining, but in a different kind of video altogether. Player number 2, Eugenio Velez. Talk about a mic drop. It was September 28, 2011, and the season for the Los Angeles Dodgers was nearing its conclusion. They were in third place in the NL West, hovering at the 500 mark, pretty much going nowhere. In the 8th inning, with a 7-0 lead against the D-backs, manager Don Mattingly sent a pinch hitter to the plate in a meaningless game. But not just any pinch hitter, Eugenio Velez, who, 5 games before, had tied a record no batter in baseball wants, the longest hitless streak by a non-pitcher at the time, at over 45. Velez had whiffed 3 times in 3 ABs against the Padres, and he now was a co-owner of the record. In the second to last game of the season, Mattingly gave Velez a chance to end the streak, or to outright own it by himself. Since Velez hadn't got a hit since May 2010, there was a good chance Velez would be 0 for 46 and a record holder. In fact, had Velez not singled in extra innings for his last hit, he would be looking at an 0 for 66. Wait, this guy was a .241 career hitter. During his first 3 years in the bigs, Velez hit over .260. He was another talented middle infielder from San Pedro de Macorís in the Dominican Republic, a shortstop hamlet that had produced 99 major leaguers, including Fernando Tatis Sr. and Jr., Robinson Cano, and Alfonso Soriano, among other stars. Few players on earth have produced such a trove of baseball talent. When he came up in 2007, he was considered a decent prospect of the San Francisco Giants, a speedy contact hitter who could wreak havoc on the bases. But by 2010, he was in Fresno, and the Giants were headed to one of their first 3 World Series championships. But a fresh start with the Dodgers hadn't exactly helped Velez. Having gone hitless in his last 9 ABs with the Giants, he then went hitless in every one of his Dodgers at-bats, including the one on September 28th, when he cemented his legacy with an over 46. He wasn't hitting into a rash of bad luck, mind you. There were almost no close calls, just strikeouts and weak grounders. He did hit 2 line drives, but without StatCast, we don't really know how hard they were hit, or where they were. Then, Velez's career ended. Technically, his streak didn't. If, magically somehow, he managed to make it back to the MLB today, he'd pick up right where he left off. Velez did manage to keep playing professional baseball in Mexico and the Dominican Republic for years after his over 46 tanked him, so props to him for holding on to his dream for as long as he possibly could, despite one of the most depressing stretches in baseball history for any hitter. Player number 3, Craig Counsell. Craig Counsell was just named manager of the Chicago Cubs on a huge deal that will pay him more than he earned during his playing days, but before he was a managerial wizard, he dealt with a similar stretch as Velez. What's crazy is, it happened at nearly the same time. On the surface, it seemed like Craig Counsell was a scrappy, hard-nosed player who was too mentally tough to have registered such a long hitless streak. He was a .255 career hitter with a WAR of 22.4. In 2001, he was MVP of the NLCS and helped lead the D-backs to a World Series victory over the Yankees. But the over 45 record that Velez broke in 2011 had belonged to the very same Counsell. What's truly bewildering is that Craig had held the record for only about 7 weeks. Perhaps no season in MLB history dwelt on hitless streaks like 2011, and for good reason. First, when Counsell was nearing over 45, the world's greatest sabermetricians went into something like a frenzy, because it wasn't entirely clear what the official record was. It was clear that broadcaster Dave Campbell had gone over 45 in 1973, while playing for 3 different teams. But back then, the game wasn't as stats-centric, and until Counsell was nearing the mark, Campbell had no idea what his hitless streak truly was. The record, it was thought, had been over 46, set in 1909 by catcher Bill Bergen, who many researchers call the worst hitter in baseball history. But upon further review, it turned out Bergen had really gone over 45, not 46, because records from 1909 were spotty and hard to decipher. On August 1st, 2011, Counsell pinch hit for pitcher Zack Greinke and popped up, an unremarkable play except for the fact that with that AB, Counsell had tied both Campbell and Bergen. The irony is that Zack Greinke was a fearsome hitter for a pitcher, with a .225 career average, and during that streak, Counsell seen his own average dip from .236 to .145, which was exactly what Greinke was hitting at the time. The difference was, Greinke arguably had more raw power. Again, unlike Chris Davis, Counsell wasn't hitting the ball hard during his streak. You see, sports can be cruel to players who are nearing the end of their career, and Counsell, at 40 and in his 16th year as a big leaguer, surely was doing that. He would retire as an active player right after Eugenio V&eacute broke the dubious record. There's a truism in baseball that backup catchers make good managers, because they can relate to all the players on the team, top to bottom. The same perhaps can be said of those who suffer through prolonged struggles at the plate. Craig Counsell, a Notre Dame grad and very intelligent man, became a very astute manager, perhaps in no small part because he'd undergone the turmoil of failure and had battled through it. Baseball is truly a game of failure after all, and Craig Counsell lived through it to tell the tale. Player number 4, Justin Ruggiano. Hitless streaks can be like the flu. When they rage, they can call the herd. V&eacute saw his career end with one. Counsell had to endure one as his retirement loomed. Davis had already fallen steeply down the food chain when his over 54 came and went. But can a player in his prime come down with this dreaded condition? Sadly, of course, yes. But there's a silver lining in the case of Justin Ruggiano. In 2007, the Tampa Bay Rays were brimming with talent. They had incredible athletes like Carl Crawford, B.J. Upton, Delmon Young, and Elijah Dukes in the outfield, ready to do damage at the plate and on the bases. But there was another outfield prospect no one much talked about, who would go on to have a productive 9-year MLB career, Justin Ruggiano. But how was he ever going to get in the field? He broke in 2007 for a cup of coffee, and in 2008, the year the Rays made it to World Series, he appeared in 45 games. However, he didn't do much at the plate in either year, and with the Rays now one of the best teams in baseball, he spent all of 2009 and 2010 at AAA Durham, thereby making Ruggiano the perfect quad-A player. Too good for the minors, but not quite an MLB talent. But then something funny happened when Ruggiano turned 29. He got better. He started hitting over 300 in the minors consistently, and when the Miami Marlins gave him a chance to play in 2012, he was ready. He hit 13 homers in 91 games and established himself as a certified MLB talent. After years of toiling in obscurity, he'd made it. Then came 2013. The steady progress Ruggiano had made came to a screeching halt on July 8th, when Ruggiano went hitless. The streak continued for 47 straight plate appearances and 42 official at-bats, before it ended, mercifully, before Ruggiano broke V&eacute's record. But Ruggiano was a tough Texan, and he didn't just break out of said slump. No, he slugged out, hitting bombs and going back to his new old self right after. In the offseason, the Marlins traded him to the Cubs, where Ruggiano put up an OPS plus of 112. The next year, he split time between Seattle and the Dodgers, with his combined OPS plus of 123 being nearly 25% better than league average. Beyond this, he would play in small parts of 2 more productive seasons before hanging up his cleats. Ruggiano's entire career is a testament to his unwavering tenacity. Going over 42 was nothing compared to being stuck in the minors for season after season, and he emerged from both that terrible situation and the reverse hitting streak victorious, tallying career earnings of over $7 million when all was said and done, while registering as an above-average MLB hitter overall, with a career 104 OPS plus. Player number 5, Brandon Lowe. There are streak hitters, and then there are players like Brandon Lowe. Rays fan notes this undersized slugger can carry a team for weeks, and then just as suddenly turn cold as ice, seemingly unable to make contact with a beach ball. His punishing hitless streak isn't one of the longest in MLB history, but perhaps one of the worst timed, as his over 36 in the ALDS spanned 2 seasons, from 2020 to 2021. Against the Yankees and Red Sox, teams that Lowe had owned at various times since his arrival in 2019, he got nary a hit, and struck out about 50% of the time. In 2020, the Rays survived his flailing, bailed out by Randy Arozarena and Mike Brosseau. Then, although in the ALCS and World Series Lowe had only 4 hits, they were all homers, all game changers, showing you in a microcosm how Lowe rolls. One week he can't hit a soft toss, and the next he's tallying clutch hit after clutch hit. The Rays couldn't survive his streakiness in 2021, the year the team won 100 games, and Lowe hit 39 homers, while registering OPS plus of 140. Against the Red Sox, Lowe did absolutely nothing, and the team dropped 3 straight after winning Game 1. The fact is, Brandon Lowe is one of the worst hitters in postseason history overall, even when his reverse streak is put to the side. His batting averages of 115 and an OBP of 167 are the lowest among players with a minimum of 100 plate appearances, ever. It's a hard pill to swallow, since Lowe is one of the best power-hitting second basemen the game has seen in recent years. But it's also just as likely that should the Rays get back to the postseason in 2024, something they are likely to do, Lowe could go off and rectify these stats in nearly one single stretch. So far, we haven't included pitchers in our discussion, but they do deserve a bit of a brief mention. The all-time hitless record belongs to Jon Lester, one of the game's greatest competitors, who beat the Yips long enough to tally 200 career wins and nearly 2,500 Ks. This kind of longevity also allowed him to log an 0 for 66 nightmare in the box. As an AL pitcher with the Red Sox and A's, Lester got roughly 4 ABs a season, which all resulted in fat goose eggs, and so when he signed with the Cubs in 2015, he was already riding an 0 for 41 that extended back to 2006. The thing is, in high school, Lester was a stud athlete who routinely hit homers with his solid swing, making hard contact often enough otherwise as well. After he finally notched that first career hit off his buddy John Lackey, snapping the record 0 for 66 to begin his career, Lester would go on to gather 42 more hits, including 4 bombs. In 2019, he had 188. He doesn't deserve to hold this record, based on his skill set alone. And now, thanks to the universal DH rule, he would likely own it for the foreseeable future, if not ever. Someone who might so deserve this title is Wei-Yin Chen, who owned an 0 for 51 to begin his career. After signing with the Marlins in 2016, he carried an 0 for 6 start from the AL into the National League, where he promptly went 0 for 45. But all of that changed in 2017 during his first start, when he hit a 65-mile-per-hour roller to short and reached on an infield single, the definition of a lucky knock. He did rebound somewhat with 6 hits in 2018, retiring from the game soon after with a career average of .068. It doesn't matter who you are, the 0 for monster can find you. Take George Springer as an example. Despite being one of the best all-around players in the game for years, this past season, he weathered an 0 for 35. Stats tell us he was largely hitting into bad luck. His exit velocities remained at his career level, with his expected WOBA being 20 points higher than his real, 336 to 306. Springer ended the season hitting .257, with a slightly lower power total relative to his career norm. He'll be 34 next year, with his monster 2019 of 39 dingers and a .292 batting average seeming further and further away every season. So, at the end of this, are hitless streaks harbingers of a decline, or just a small sample size that should be dismissed? His Springer streak, for example, a sign the Jays should unload him now, while he still has value, or should they look at his expected numbers and determine that he'll likely return to his career level, at least before the aging curve is considered? The truth is, at the end of the day, like we mentioned above, every player will go through cold streaks. Whether they go completely hitless during these periods or not, it's how they come out of this that define them as ball players. In this video, we've seemingly depicted both sides of the coin. Counsell beating his offer with the mentality that would go on to define his excellence as a coach, and Ruggiano not letting his confidence slip, even after years of toiling in the minors, enough to post above average numbers for years after. Davis, on the other hand, could never truly seem to emerge victorious. Even after his nightmare run ended, he still ranked as one of the worst ball players ever until his premature retirement after 2021. Eugenio Velez never saw his streak end, immortalizing himself as the only player on this list with his slump still intact. As for Lowe, I guess we'll have to see what happens with his career, as since his cold streak from 2020 through 2021 and some of the biggest moments of the year, he's managed to post just marginally above average hitting totals in the low 110 OPS plus range, a far cry from his 125 to 150 heydays before that.
Baseball has had no shortage of beloved players over the years. From Lou Gehrig, Hank Aaron, Willie Mays, to Cal Ripken Jr., Ken Griffey Jr., Adrian Beltre, to Ichiro Suzuki, Mookie Betts, and Shohei Ohtani, there are some players who it just feels like everybody likes, regardless of how they're viewed as rivals to the league as a whole. And then there's the other side of the spectrum. The players everybody loves to hate, the ones you enjoy rooting against, the proverbial villains in our cherished game's long history, the ones who are not only chastised by the fans, but by their fellow players and front offices as well. Maybe it's because they used steroids, or had an ego the size of the Grand Canyon, or perhaps both. Maybe it's because they broke the law off the field, or committed any number of potential offenses on or near the field. The possible reasons are myriad.
But who amongst the crop have accrued enough of these instances to be considered the most hated players in MLB history? Who seems to come up on almost everybody's list? Before we get to that though, I want to ask that if you enjoyed this video, consider liking and subscribing. If we hit 4,000 likes in this video, I'll make a part 2 with your most popular suggestions included. With that being said, let's hop right into it. First up, Charlie Hustle himself. From the moment he hit the field as a 21-year-old second baseman for the Reds in 1963, Pete Rose played the game as hard as anyone ever has. He did so because he wanted to win, but also because he wanted to be noticed winning. There's one more important reason I slide head first. It gets my picture in the paper. Of course, Rose's hard-hitting style of play rubbed some opponents the wrong way, and sometimes even teammates. Many of these players considered him dirty, aggressive, and at times completely unhinged, like in the 1970 All-Star Game when Rose barreled over catcher Ray Fosse to score the winning run. Rose would miss 3 games with a bruised knee as a result, but it was Fosse that suffered the real injuries, including a fractured and separated shoulder, leaving him a shell of the player he was pre-collision. At the time, Fosse was an up-and-coming star behind the dish, but this instance left him relatively crippled in baseball terms. And for what? Another picture in the paper? It was the All-Star Game after all. But that was really just the tip of the iceberg with Rose. In the end, his competitiveness and arrogance got the best of him. Over the years, fans had grown accustomed to Rose being a royal pain in the ass at times, as he was involved in everything from altercations with umpires to tax evasion charges to even being accused of an inappropriate relationship with a 15-year-old. Despite all this, Rose hustled his way to several major league records, many of which he still holds today, including most career hits, games played, and at-bats. But unfortunately, being baseball's all-time hit king is not what Rose is known for principally today. It's the fact that he bet on Major League Baseball. When initially questioned about his gambling in 1989 by then baseball commissioner Peter Ueberroth, Rose claimed that he'd only bet on football, basketball, and horse racing. But of course this wasn't exactly true, and when the truth finally did come out, Rose received a lifetime suspension, garnering him a stain on his record that will more than likely keep him out of Cooperstown permanently. Now, baseball's hit king can be found at places like Caesar's Palace in Vegas, signature on memorabilia and mingling with those remaining fans he has left on his side. While the chorus of fans who think the hit king should be in the hall still have a fairly healthy voice, it seems to have less to do with who he was personally and more to do with the sanctity of the hall itself. After all, Rose would have never won a popularity contest outside of the cities he played in, and even then, it probably depended on the night.
The pitch. Bonds hits one high. Out of here. 750.
No, Barry, how does the baseball world hate thee? Let me count the ways. It seems like every baseball fan had one reason or another for disliking someone who is undoubtedly one of the best players who ever played the game, if not the best, period. Barry grew up on Major League Baseball fields, hitting batting practice with the big leaguers alongside his father Bobby Bonds. As a result, he developed a prodigious talent for the sport, an enormous sense of confidence, and a gargantuan ego. Bonds was constantly tussling with the media, feuding with teammates, or getting into altercations with coaches. He quickly earned a reputation as smug and unlikable. His self-centered play helped him to shatter records, but it also cost him dearly at times. Take one of the most important games in Pittsburgh Pirates history, Game 7 of the 1992 National League Championship Series between the Pirates and Atlanta Braves. If you're a Pirates fan, you probably remember that vividly. The light-hitting utility player Francisco Cabrera lined a single into left field in front of the charging Bonds, whose throw came in too wide and too short to gun down the slow-footed Sid Bream at the plate. It was a gutting moment for Pirates fans, and as it later turned out, perhaps an unnecessary one. Prior to the play, the Pirates Gold Glove center fielder Andy Van Slyke motioned to Bonds to play shallower with the winning run on second base. According to Van Slyke, the stubborn Bonds not only ignored the advice, but gave his teammate the middle finger. He gave me the international peace sign, Van Slyke later told MLB Network. Even breaking the single-season home run record, and perhaps baseball's biggest record, the all-time home run mark, held by one of baseball's most impressive figures, Henry Aaron, did little to win him any supporters. And once Bonds became linked to steroids, placing a huge asterisk next to those numbers, Barry became one of the biggest villains in baseball history, not to mention the poster boy for the steroid era. Ultimately, the home run king was even found guilty of obstruction of justice in the Bulko steroid rings case for giving evasive answers under oath for his steroid usage. Even in retirement, Barry has found controversy, including in a brief stint as the hitting coach for the Miami Marlins, during which times he was allegedly described as extremely useless and unlikable. Former Marlins president David Sampson even came out later and said that he was completely ineffective as a hitting coach, stating that he would sleep in the clubhouse and not pay attention during games. He didn't work hard. It was a complete disaster. The Marlins ranked 27th in MLB in runs scored that season, and Bonds was promptly fired. Barry Bonds will likely never be inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame like Rose, further tainting his legacy. What a shame.
Canseco bids for the second homer of the inning, and it settles into the upper deck.
Oh my goodness.
Few have impacted the modern game in quite the same way that Jose Canseco did. When the former Bash brother released his autobiography Juiced, it unleashed a hurricane of scandal on the game that it's arguably still recovering from. In the book, Canseco shined a light on baseball's steroid era and named names, including his own, along with Mark McGwire, Rafael Palmeiro, Jason Giambi, and a slew of others. Canseco was considered a traitor and a snitch by fellow players, and a headache by the league. And despite being a whistleblower and one of the first players to admit using steroids, he was still never embraced by fans. That, of course, was nothing new for Jose. He had spent a good chunk of his career pissing people off, alienating fans, and acting like a 6'3", 230-pound diva. The muscle-bound slugger had exploded into baseball in 1987, hitting 33 home runs as a rookie and winning the Rookie of the Year award. Following spring training, he told reporters he would be the first player ever to hit 40 home runs and steal 40 bases in a season, and then he did it. Before all was said and done, he would record 462 home runs, an MVP award, and 6 All-Star appearances, but his career and post-career have become notable for a very different reason than his on-field production, or even his steroid involvement, as he's also partaken in a steady succession of increasingly bizarre actions. On the field, Canseco was involved in perhaps the greatest baseball blooper of all time, when a fly ball hit off the bat of Cleveland's Carlos Martinez hit Jose on the head and bounced over the wall for a home run. Off the field, things went even further off the rails for Canseco. In 2001, Jose and his brother Ozzie got into a fight at a Miami nightclub with a couple of California tourists, giving one a broken nose and leaving the other needing 20 stitches in his lip. Since then, Jose's also been arrested for carrying a loaded weapon, aggravated battery against an ex-wife, and domestic battery against another ex-wife. In 2008, he decided to try sanction violence, challenging a former NFL football player to fight him in Atlantic City. That player accepted and knocked out Canseco in the first round. Needless to say, Canseco, for all of his exploits on and off the field, will never be inducted into the Hall of Fame or win any popularity contests among fans. How could you have a most hated players list without Ty Cobb? The Pete Rose of his day, Cobb was known for being dirty, swearing at fans and journalists, and sliding into bases with his spikes up. Cobb was also constantly getting into altercations, with the resulting stories that survived the test of time not being very pretty. Have you heard the one about him stabbing a hotel manager after getting into a fight with an elevator operator? Or about the time in spring training in 1907 when a black groundskeeper who had known Cobb for years attempted to pat him on the shoulder, and Cobb slapped the man? And then when the man's wife tried to intervene, Cobb choked her until his teammates pried his hands off her neck. Or what about the time that Cobb nearly choked out an umpire under the bleachers? Or the time he jumped into the stands to beat a fan who was heckling his team? With that fan turning out to be a man who was missing most of both of his hands due to an industrial accident. Or that time that he took a whip to his son after he flunked out of Princeton. But hold on. Maybe it wasn't that simple. Ty Cobb was undoubtedly an extremely competitive player with aggressive tendencies, but was he the racist near-criminal he's often portrayed as today? A recent book about Cobb by a former Sports Illustrated editor who dug deep into the legends surrounding the player argued that many of the stories circulating about Cobb came from some dubious sources, and most cannot be independently verified. Cobb more than likely was no saint, but there's a good chance his legacy has been unfairly impacted by some tall tales that got circulated by those who had an axe to grind against him in the media. Most will of course not let the facts get in the way of a good story, meaning Cobb will more than likely remain one of the most hated players in the history of the game for the foreseeable future.
Fly ball center field, well hit, at the track, he's done it again!
Has any player who was as good as Alex Rodriguez was ever been so insufferable? In recent years, A-Rod has done a lot of work off the field as a broadcaster, social media figure, and general baseball personality to rehabilitate his stunted image, but will more than likely not have much of an impact on his legacy, at least in relation to his player persona. It's nearly impossible to find a fan who didn't hate A-Rod when he was active, even many of those in his home city where he put up Hall of Fame worthy numbers for over a decade. But it wasn't just those fans. He was once voted the second most hated player in baseball in a 2012 Men's Journal article that pulled 100 MLB players. Rodriguez's own teammates even gave him the nickname of A-Fraud. The ire for A-Rod, of course, starts with his PED use. He admitted in 2009, after previously denying it, that he had used steroids from 2001 to 2003 while with the Rangers. His entire 2014 season was also spent in a suspension thanks to PED use. When not cheating with PEDs, Alex attempted a number of Bush League moves on the field. Remember when he was called out for interference after slapping away an attempted tag along the first baseline during the 2004 American League Championship Series? Or the time when rounding the bases in Toronto behind Blue Jays third baseman Howie Clark, who was under a pop fly, when he yelled, "Mine," causing Clark to let the ball drop? Or how he once threw baseballs behind the Yankees dugout with his number on them to women after he'd been pulled from a game. Off the field during this period, Alex did even more to court controversy, from being spotted out in the town with a blonde stripper while he was married, to agreeing to a photo shoot where he kissed his own reflection. He also allegedly had two paintings hanging over his bed of himself as a centaur. You'd be saying more? So, those are MTC's picks for the most hated players in baseball history for today. However, we do still have some honorable mentions. In one Sports Illustrated interview, the former Braves reliever managed to insult women, minorities, subway passengers, and even single mothers. Rocker was also later mentioned in the Mitchell Report for allegations of steroid use. Besides that, on the field, he was known as a head-hunting, ill-tempered semi-maniac, who became infamous for his epic meltdowns in the clubhouse. Not a great reputation overall. Really, the entire 2017 Astros team could be on here, but we're going to instead single out the veteran who supposedly spearheaded the whole operation. The slugging outfielder who hit 435 career home runs with amazing defense in center field for over a decade once appeared to be a no-doubt Hall of Famer, but his role as ringleader of the Houston Astros sign-stealing scandal has forever tarnished his reputation among fans, and, at least for now, Hall of Fame voters. Is this fair? Probably not, but it is understandable at least. Remember that Men's Journal players poll I mentioned that had A-Rod as the second most hated player in the league? Pierzynski was number 1. That takes some work. As one anonymous player told the Journal, he likes to talk a lot of shit. If you haven't got 5 years in the big leagues, he treats you like you're a peasant. He's that kind of guy. That sounds more like frat bro behavior than big league conduct. Like Canseco, Bell was a fearsome slugger, but one who could not stay out of his own way. Incidents on the field included throwing a baseball at a fan, using a corked bat, and tackling players on his way around the bases. His off-the-field reputation is somehow even worse than that, as he stalked his ex-girlfriend, drove drunk, and committed indecent exposure in front of a man and his daughter.
There's no such thing as paranoia, wrote the famed journalist Hunter S. Thompson. Your worst fears can come true at any moment. Many MLB pitchers can relate, especially when a terrifying hitter pounds his bat against the on-deck circle, sending the donut plunging. One last dollop of pine tar, some rosin, and then their stride towards the plate. Fear and loathing were specialties of Thompson, but they also do describe what baseball's scariest hitters have generated inside the minds of hapless hurlers for generations. There are sluggers who would be considered scary just based on their physical size alone. Aaron Judge is one of the largest humans to ever take an MLB at-bat at 6'7", 282, but not far behind was 6'7", 255-pound Frank Howard, aka the Washington Monument, who, with the Senators, put together some monster years. Opposing pitchers tried to avoid the spectacle of Howard taking BP because the sight was too intimidating to behold. How could they go into the game and throw this guy hittable pitches when they saw his rifle shots before the contest? But let's not gloss over the threat of physical danger that certain hitters have invoked as well, especially if the player had an appetite for charging the mound. Prime Albert Bell of the Indians was known to be surly to his teammates, and he had no qualms about throwing haymakers at opposing pitchers. Sure, hitters who are enormous and ill-tempered are very, very scary, but they can also instill fear with their minds as well. Some have baseball IQs so high that pitchers seem at a loss at how to handle them. Tony Gwynn was one of the most good-natured people ever to become a superstar, yet he terrified pitchers with his approach. He was one of the first players to make extensive use of videotape, and his cerebral approach to the plate kept him out of bad counts. He was intentionally walked more than you'd think. But the absolute scariest hitters in MLB history combine elements of most of or all of these traits: power, brawn, smarts, nerves of steel, causing pitchers the major leagues over to pray for an atom ball, a deep fly, or to just give up the battle altogether and refuse to throw strikes. So, who exactly were these juggernauts? Player number 1, Barry Bonds. If you want a statistical definition of fear, here it is. In 2004, Barry Bonds set the MLB record for on-base percentage in a single season at .609. Let's ruminate on that a second. Playing against the best players in the world, Barry Bonds performed like that ridiculous stud in Little League who never got out and was always on base. He made an out in less than 40% of his ABs, during a season where he also hit .262 with 45 bombs. He somehow walked an MLB record 232 times that year. The OBP record he broke was his own, set in 2002, when he got on base at a .582 clip. He hit .370 that season with 46 dingers. Bonds is, quite obviously, the all-time leader in intentional walks, with 688, including once with the bases loaded. That happened in 1998, when the Giants were playing the D-backs. Arizona manager Buck Showalter's team was up 8-6, when Bonds came up to the plate with the bases jacked. And, just like that, it was 8-7, after Bonds was given first base. It was probably the right move. The D-backs went on to win the game. People might be surprised to learn that Bonds was the MLB leader in homers just twice during his 22-year career, but these 2 years defined Bonds in remarkable ways. The first year was in 1993, when Bonds was 28 and weighed 190 pounds. No one disputed that he was the game's best overall player, the second coming of Willie Mays. During the 1990s, he averaged 30-30 totals to belong with 8 Gold Gloves. He twice registered an OPS plus over 200, something no one besides him has done since. He was lean, strong, fast, the embodiment of a 5-tool superstar.
If Bonds had retired in 1999, he probably would have had a great case for Cooperstown. He led the league in homers again in 2001 when he hit 73 dingers and walked 177 times. It seemed like he would maybe get 2 or 3 pitches to hit every game, and one of them would end up in the seats. Bonds was 20 pounds heavier than before, all of it muscle and cranium. Many players took steroids, but only Bonds set an MLB record with an OPS of 1422 in 2004 when he was 39 years old. 6 total times, Bonds had OPS plus numbers that were over twice the league average, which ties him with Ted Williams for the most all time. 3 times he was over 250. In 2002, Bonds put up a 268 OPS plus that was, and more than likely will be for a long time, the best in the history of MLB. In fact, Bonds alone holds the top 3, all set between 2001 and 2004. That is truly mind-boggling. Player number 2, Babe Ruth. Imagine being a pitcher in 1921. At the plate is a man as big as any in the MLB, who, up until 2 seasons ago, was one of the best pitchers in the game. Now, here he is doing things at the plate that have never been done, swatting homers at a rate unknown to the sport. In 1919, he hit 29 homers. More than 10 teams hit that season, and more than any player has ever hit. The previous record of 27 had been set in 1884. Then, Ruth broke that record in 1920 with 54. Now we're in a world no one in MLB had ever visited, a slugger so head and shoulders above everyone else that it seemed like he was playing a different sport. Though pitchers in 1921 suspect as much, statisticians will estimate that Ruth is 2 or 3 standard deviations above an MLB player at this time, basically in the top 0.3%, or put another way, out of 1,000 MLB players, 3 are close to as good as Ruth. The problem? There are only 400 players in 1921. So, if you were to double the size of the league and corresponding talent pool, still no one would be better. Your job as a pitcher is to get this hulking bruiser out, with his 54-ounce bat that he grips at the handle on the bottom. That, my friends, is true fear. As great as Bonds was in 2002 to 2004, it's debatable that he ever had a better year than Babe Ruth in 1921, at least relative to historical precedent at the time. For the 3rd straight year, Ruth set the all-time home run record, this time with 59. He clubbed 35 more homers than the hitter in 2nd place, more than doubling their total. Imagine a year in which Matt Olson hits 40 dingers to finish 2nd overall in the bigs, but the overall winner hits 82. For context, the year Bonds hit 73, Sammy Sosa, another obvious roidster, hit 64. The Babe was reinventing the sport in real time, and pitchers reacted with trepidation. On top of those 59 homers, the Babe walked 145 times. He also hit 44 doubles and 16 triples, giving him 119 extra base hits, good for 457 total bases, both of which are still single-season records. His 177 runs scored is 2nd best. At the time, his 168 RBIs were the single-season record, until Lou Gehrig broke it in 1927 with 173, the year that Ruth broke his own home run record with 60. Scientists in 1921 tried to explain Ruth's dominance by subjecting him to a battery of tests, because, as former teammate Pinch Thomas explained, I am not so certain that Babe is human. At least, he does things that you couldn't expect a mere batter with 2 arms and 2 legs to do. I can't explain him. Nobody can. He just exists. The most remarkable finding of the study at the time was that Ruth didn't breathe during his swing, as if he'd sucked in all the power in the world to unload on the baseball. There were even rumors he'd hit a ball 700 feet during spring training. The same study found that Ruth's eyes were 12% faster than the average man, and his hardest swings came on balls low and away. By 1931, Ruth had 611 career homers. In 2nd place was NL superstar Rogers Hornsby. He had 295. It took until 1935 before a player reached even half of Ruth's career total, and almost 40 years for someone else to surpass it. Player number 3, Albert Pujols. As the 1999 draft approached, teams were scouting Hep-B shortstop at Metropolitan Community College Maplewood in Kansas. The Tampa Bay Rays, who would draft 8 future major leaguers that year, designated the player to go between rounds 30 and 50. The Cardinals, however, had him rated much higher than that, and took him in the 13th round, signing him for $60,000. He was still, at most, an afterthought in a farm system notorious for churning out many a superstar over the years. Most of those guys were taken within the first 10 rounds. That player, of course, was Albert Pujols, who, at 6'3" and 235 pounds, was playing out of position at short. The Cards moved him around the diamond a little bit before settling on first, and from there, the rest is history. Pujols would join in a very exclusive group as he aged, the 700 Club, where just Barry Bonds, Hank Aaron, and Babe Ruth reside. Within that club is another one, even smaller, with just Aaron and Pujols allowed in. those with more than 700 career bombs who never struck out 100 times in a season. Pujols and Aaron are also the only players with 600 homers, 600 doubles, and 3,000 hits. Unlike Bonds and Ruth, Pujols never walked a tremendous amount, or, as we said above, struck out. In his prime, he was almost like if Ichiro had the power of Ken Griffey Jr. Yeah, he wasn't as fast as these guys, and played a much easier defensive position at first, although he did play well. But at the plate, he had few equals. For his first 10 big league seasons, Pujols hit over 300 each year, for a .331 average, to go along with 41 homers and 123 RBIs per 162 games played. It was one of the most impressive runs of hitting since World War II. You could argue that lineup protection from some really good Cardinals teams that went to the postseason 7 times during those first 10 seasons, with 2 World Series championships, let Pujols see a lot of good pitches. But Ruth and Bonds had played on good teams too, and still walked and K'd at higher rates. The truth was, Pujols was more of a free swinger than either of those guys, and for that period in his career, this worked for him to a T. While he did trail off towards the latter half of his career pretty harshly, he held on long enough to tally those impressive milestones we listed above, all while keeping his career OPS plus at a very healthy 145. Player number 4, Ken Griffey Jr., the anointed one, the one who by the age of 26 had already crushed 200 homers, the one who hit 56 clean dingers in 1998, while Sosa and McGuire were taking turns sticking needles in their posterior. That same year, Griffey passed the 350 career homer mark. He was 28 years old, and, like A-Rod a few years later, many believed 800 career homers wasn't impossible. Hall of Fame manager Bobby Cox saw Griffey play in high school, and he claimed Ken was the best prospect he'd ever seen, and it wasn't close. In his prime, Griffey was as close to Mays as the game has ever seen, perhaps even more so than Bonds, given his elite defense out of center field, where he predominantly played the corners. He broke into the game as a much-hyped prospect at 19, playing on the same team as his father, Ken Griffey Sr., who was himself a high-caliber player for the Big Red Machine back in the 70s. Perhaps no other father-son duo will ever again hit back-to-back homers like the Griffeys did in 1990. Jr. seemed like he'd been created in a laboratory, with the sole intent of crafting the perfect baseball player. He made jaws drop every time he ran onto the baseball field. His lefty swing was pure poetry, capable of producing tremendous power even at just 195 pounds. In 1993, he tied the Major League record by homering in 8 straight games. The next season, he broke the Babe's record for most bombs hit before July 1st, with 32. It was going to happen. The record 61 by Roger Maris was going down, and Jr. would be the man to do it. He had 40 homers by August 11th, and then the strike happened, and Griffey stayed stuck. It wouldn't be his last run of bad luck. At the peak of his powers, Griffey put up numbers that rivaled the greatest the game has ever seen. From the 1997 to 1999 seasons, Jr. socked 160 homers and drove in 427 runs, which averages out to 53 bombs and 142 RBIs per year. He also won Gold Gloves each season. In 1997, he was the unanimous choice for AL MVP. He stayed healthy all 3 years, appearing in almost every game. As Tony La Russa said at the time, Griffey's talent didn't have a ceiling. But, sadly, after a trade to Cincinnati in 2000, injuries marred his epic run to immortality. In 8 seasons with the Reds, he played over 140 games in a year just twice. He would go on to play with the White Sox briefly as well, before coming back to the M's in 2009 and 2010. But, after hitting just 184 in his last year, Griffey would call it quits, finishing with 630 career homers, well short of the record and even that of his historical comp, Mays, at 660. Still, over his 2-decade career in the bigs, he had managed to terrify pitchers in both leagues, post 6 separate years with over 40 dingers, 5 with top 5 MVP finishes, and 4 where he posted an OPS over 1,000. All of that to go along with 2,700 career hits, 500 doubles, and a 907 career OPS. Player number 5, Willie Mays. Speaking of Mays, Willie was widely regarded as one of the best baseball players of all time even when he was still active, and a fearsome foe at the plate. In his prime, between 1954 and 1965, he hit over 40 homers 6 times, won 2 MVPs, and never posted a WAR below 7.6. What set Mays apart in his day was his electrifying combination of power and speed, meaning that he not only terrified pitchers with his power potential, but also with what he could do if they just put him on. He joined the 30-30 club 3 times after all, while swiping over 300 bases in his career in total. Despite being by far the most undersized player on this list at 5'10", Mays still clubbed 660 career homers. But still, Willie wasn't merely a slugger, he was a complete hitter, who routinely batted over 330 in his prime, even leading the league at 347 in 1954. In the world of baseball commentary, discussing Willie Mays' offensive abilities is like waxing poetic about a timeless masterpiece. and it can also seem a bit tired. At this point, his greatness has been discussed in baseball circles so often that it seems that people are almost numb to it. There are 156 career WAR, those aforementioned 660 career home runs, the 24 All-Star Game selections. But make no mistake, no pitcher who ever faced Willie forgot about it, especially those who he somehow managed to hit hard enough to clear the wind-blown spacious dimensions of Candlestick Park in his prime. You see, that was one more thing that made him special. He put up most of those gaudy power numbers in perhaps the hardest field to hit a home run in during that era. Imagine the terror pitchers felt when he stepped up to the plate in a hitter's park. Player number 6, Frank Thomas. When your nickname is the Big Hurt, pitchers perk up their ears. Frank Thomas stood 6'5" and weighed 240 pounds, befitting the D1 tight end that he was. But after he was injured playing football during his sophomore season at Auburn, Thomas decided to quit to focus on baseball full-time. He wouldn't regret it. Baseball was a sport Thomas had dominated in high school, but he'd gone undrafted. It bothered him for his entire career, despite being taken in the first round 3 years later. So, he decided to take his frustration out on pitchers. In the history of baseball, no other hitter has had 7 straight seasons of hitting 300 with over 20 homers, 100 walks, and 100 RBIs. No one. Not Ruth, not Bonds, not Pujols. The Big Hurt stands alone. At his peak, Thomas thought he could hit a ball 600 feet during a game. To intimidate teams, he would take BP with an aluminum bat and send balls deep into the stratosphere. But he was also known for taking a pitch an inch off the plate, underscoring his incredible plate discipline. He led the league in walks and OBP 4 times, while claiming one batting title in 1997 with a .347 average. He also took a very anti-PED stance during the McGuire-Sosa-Bonds spectacle of the steroid era. Thomas did all of what he did, including posting over 500 career homers, winning 2 MVPs, and slashing a career .301, .419, .555 clean, further underscoring just how mind-bogglingly scary it must have been to face off against him in his prime. No hurler could hide behind the theory that he was just juiced. He'd always looked like that, and no moundman was safe from his vicious but controlled hacks. Player number 7, Ted Williams. Thomas used an aluminum bat during BP to intimidate pitchers, while the greatest hitter who ever lived, Ted Williams, used his mouth. Teddy Ballgame would stand at home plate and scream as the ball came in. "Just one spot think you can get me out with that crap slider?" Boom! He'd name pitcher after pitcher, sending baseballs deep into the stands. Ted Williams didn't think any MLB pitcher was good enough to get him out, ever. He of course backed up this bravado with a .344 career average, 3rd best in the game since 1930. He also is the last player to hit over 400. And chances are, given the talent level of modern pitchers, as well as how bullpens are used these days, he'll probably be the last. Only 9 players hit over 300 this year, for example. Yeah, batting average is a meaningless stat, but it does provide a nice cross-generational benchmark. Ted Williams hit .328 and won a batting crown at age 40 in 1958. He won his first batting title in 1941, a span of 17 years, the longest in MLB history. This matters because Williams lost 5 seasons in his prime to military service, between the ages of 24 and 34. So, basically, Williams probably missed 5 versions of his 1949 season, when he was 30, and hit .343 with 43 homers and 39 doubles, while walking 162 times and driving in 159. He, of course, led the league in OBP, which he did 12 different times. He's actually the game's all-time OBP champion, with a career mark of .482. That's right, Teddy Ballgame got on almost half the time. If in those 5 seasons he had hit at least 40 homers, he would have been at 721, ahead of Ruth. Around 900 more hits, he'd have been in the company of Stan Musial and Tris Speaker, at the 3,500 level, around 4th all-time. But, regardless, even with these years missing, he still did enough to be considered one of the greatest hitters of all time, putting fear into the hearts of hurlers for 2 decades by not only barreling up the ball with consistency, but also by making pitchers have to throw him something he could actually hit. If they didn't, he'd just take his free base. Did you know the shift was actually invented to stop Ted? Yeah, and even that did little to slow him down. Now, let's get into our honorable mentions. Mark McGwire. As one of the original Bash brothers, along with Jose Canseco and Dave Henderson, McGwire's rookie season in 1987, when he blasted 49 homers while slugging .618, still stands as one of the greatest rookie hitting seasons of all time. He went on to smash 583 homers, 11th best in history, while posting the best home run to at-bat ratio ever at 10.61. He was, however, as everyone knows now, an avid steroid user, pumping up his already generous 6'5", 215-pound frame with pounds of solid muscle. His 70 homers in 1998 stood at the pinnacle of the sport until those allegations tarnished the achievement. He now says he regrets ever having taken PEDs and wishes he'd played another era. Regardless, no one can dispute when this guy was at the peak of his chemically enhanced greatness, perhaps no one in the bigs was as feared, even in an era dominated by huge sluggers. Sammy Sosa. Just ahead of McGwire on the all-time homer list is Sosa, which is fitting, because their dual chase of Maris in 1998 still rings as iconic today. Sosa remains the only player to hit over 60 homers 3 times, and, unlike McGwire, Sosa never admitted to PED use. He attributed his power surge to Flintstone gummies, and being on the field every day, which, in his prime, was true. He appeared in all 162 games in 1998, and was named the NL MVP ahead of McGwire. Sosa was, however, on a list of about 100 players who failed the drug test in 2003. The fact that he was on PEDs did little to comfort the hurlers he tortured with long ball after long ball in his prime. Miguel Cabrera. There's only one player to hit over 500 homers, gather 3,000 hits, and win a triple crown. Only one. And that is Miguel Cabrera. Miggy was destined to frighten pitchers from birth, seemingly, as his mother was one of the greatest softball players in her native country of Venezuela, playing for 14 years in the national team. She often would lead his workouts and throw him batting practice, and the family joke was that she was the better hitter. Under her tutelage, Cabrera grew into one of only 3 MLB players ever to have 3,000 hits, 500 homers, and hit over 300. The others are Hank Aaron and Willie Mays. Not bad company. Carlos Delgado. 19 players in MLB history retired with more than 400 career homers, a .280 batting average, and an OPS of .925. 15 are in the Hall of Fame. 3 have ties to PED scandals, and 1 is Carlos Delgado, who, on his first year of Hall eligibility, got less than 5% of the vote, and then vanished from the ballot. Between 1997, Delgado's first 30-homer season, and 2008, his last, just 4 players hit more homers than he did, and 3 were PED users. From 1996 to 2009, Delgado actually had the 3rd most RBIs in the game, again behind A-Rod and Manny Ramirez, again both PED users. He actually averaged more home runs per 162 games in his career than Hank Aaron, 38 to 37. Combine all that with his 6'3", 215-pound frame, and you get one of the most terrifying non-roided out hitters of the last 30 years, as well as perhaps the most underrated. Aaron Judge. The Judge has done things to baseballs like few others have since his full season debut in 2017, like registering the first 200 OPS plus season since Barry Bonds, and crushing over 50 homers twice and 60 homers once, while posting an insane 164 career OPS plus. That's higher than those of Thomas, Aaron, Mays, and Pujols. And on top of all of that, the second highest at-bat to home run ratio of all time at 11.69, and you have the recipe for one of the scariest starts to a career ever. Oh yeah, did we again mention he's 6'7", 282 pounds, the largest man to ever play the outfield for an MLB team? Mike Trout. When Mike Trout broke into the show in 2012, he led the league in OPS plus and WAR as a 20-year-old, which makes you wonder how 24 teams had passed over him in the 2009 draft. He was 6'3" then at 215 pounds, built like a linebacker, a 5-tool stud who'd broken the New Jersey high school home run record. He was the best player in the world on from that rookie year, and pretty much stayed there until 2021, when he passed the torch to teammate Shohei Ohtani. Between 2015 and 2019, he had the game's best OPS plus. 7 times he finished either first or second for AL MVP. A run of greatness like this was unprecedented to start a career, and it's something we at MTC hope he can get back to after a tough 2023. Scary hitters come in all shapes and sizes, and they frighten in a variety of ways. Bonds had supreme patience to go with otherworldly power. So did Frank Thomas and Ted Williams. Babe Ruth invented his own vocabulary to describe his prowess at the plate and at life. Ruthian. He frightened through the novelty of it all because no one had ever seen anything like him before. From a pure talent standpoint, Ken Griffey Jr. and Willie Mays largely stand alone, having scared pitchers with the overall majesty of their game for a combined over 40 years. All of these guys stand as legends of the game today, with the nightmares they invoked on opposing pitchers largely fading into the background as they take their place in the realm of nostalgia versus abject fear. But let it not be forgotten what they did to the psyche of opposing hurlers, and what a treat it was to behold.
There have been 2,272 MLB players so far, which is roughly the population of Lebanon, Ohio. So being in the MLB is kind of like living in a small town where everyone knows your name, and is in Ohio. Except this town keeps changing, very rapidly in fact. People might have known who you are back in the day, but now, with so many arrivals year after year, so many names to keep track of, it's almost like you never existed. Ohio talk aside, the rule of thumb used to be that it took about 7 to 10 years for 1,000 players to make their major league debut, but that began to change a few years ago. Now, 1,000 players debut in the bigs every 4 or 5 seasons. For context, Albert Pujols was the 15,242nd player to appear on an MLB roster on April 2nd, 2001. Since then, he's played against 25% of the total players ever to appear in the big leagues. One reason the Hall of Fame is so important is that it serves as a bulwark against the erosion of memory. The greats won't be forgotten, the sands of time won't bury legends, and fans can celebrate the enduring accomplishments of the 341 superstars who are enshrined in Cooperstown today. That's right, just 1.7 of MLB players have been elected to the Hall. But what about the 98.3% who've been condemned to languish in our fading recollection? Can we just let them drift away into oblivion? Shouldn't we try to honor some excellent players who don't deserve to be sucked up by the vacuum cleaner of history? That's why today we're going to be looking at players who were just too good to be forgotten, beginning with those with the lowest R-WAR up to those with the highest. So without further ado, let's do our best to try to immortalize some of these gems in the rough that definitely don't deserve to be forgotten. First step, Troy Glaus with the career R-WAR of 38.1. Real quick, let me give you a quiz. Who had the most home runs by the age of 24 out of these players? Nolan Arenado, Yordan Alvarez, Mark McGwire, or Troy Glaus? Okay, we pretty much gave away the answer. It's Troy Glaus, who slugged 118 round trippers by the time he turned 25. But that's not completely shocking, since Glaus won a home run title at the age of 23, when he belted 47 homers in 2000 while playing for the Los Angeles Angels. The first thing you have to understand about Troy Glaus is his size. In the summer before 9th grade, he went from 5'6" to 6'2", a growth so rapid that he had to have surgeries on both knees. He would eventually check in at 6'5", 240 pounds by the end of his senior season. By then, he'd been pegged as a can't-miss power prospect. Glaus got drafted in the second round in the 1994 draft, 37th overall by the San Diego Padres. But Glaus was worried that the Pods were in the midst of a fire sale, so he didn't end up signing. He would end up going 3rd overall in 1997 after smashing the Pac-10 to absolute smithereens. He broke Mark McGwire's single-season home run record with 34, a record that still stands today. The Angels moved Glaus to third base, and they were so high in his talents that he only spent 106 games in the minors before he got his call to the show. It may have been a little rushed. During his first 185 plate appearances in 1998, he hit exactly 1 homer while whiffing 51 times. But by the end of 1999, he'd become a fixture at third for the Halos, belting 29 homers while batting .240. It would be in the year 2000 that changed everything for Troy. As we mentioned before, he became a home run champ with 47 dingers, along with a more robust .284 batting average and an OPS plus of 150, a number even more impressive when considering this was at the height of the steroid era. He went to the All-Star game and won a Silver Slugger. The following year, Glaus went back-to-back with 40 homer seasons, dropping 41 bombs while driving in 108. And then, in 2002, Glaus burnished his legend even more. The Angels finished 99-63 and got a wild card into the playoffs, which they then parlayed into a World Series championship. All Glaus did was bat .385 with 3 homers and 8 RBIs, and win the series MVP. His Game 6 heroics, when his double put the Angels ahead after being down 5 runs, were legendary. Things would never again be so good for Glaus, however. He missed time in 2003 and 2004 with injuries, putting up subpar seasons, and then signed as a free agent with the Diamondbacks in 2005. From here, he would go on to play with 3 more teams over the next 5 years, having a couple good seasons in there, but nothing like his 2000 to 2001 heyday. His defensive numbers at third base would slip as well, eventually pushing him over to first in his final campaign. With 320 homers and a career OPS plus of 119 over just 13 seasons, only 8 of which he played in more than 120 games, Glaus proved that when he was healthy, he was one of the most productive power hitters in the game. If only he could have stayed healthy. Carlos Zambrano at 38.3. Mr. Zambrano was another very large human, coming in at 6'4" and 275 pounds, with an attitude to match. In the dugout, he could be a terror, but on the field, he was just as much of a problem. Mostly, Zambrano was the antithesis of Mark Pryor and Kerry Wood, the 2 flame-throwing phenoms that the Cubs have been counting on to be mainstays of their rotation. Sadly, both would flame out after promising starts to their careers, done in by torn UCLs and extensive overthrowing, both innings and max effort. Both had electric stuff. Zambrano, however, despite being gigantic, sat around 88 to 92 with a sinker that routinely sawed off hitters' bats. Sure, he could run his 4-seamer into the mid-90s, but along with his nasty slider, he didn't have much of a reason to be constantly trying to blow it past hitters. And this approach, for much of the 2000s, worked well for Zambrano. Between 2003 and 2010, El Toro averaged 10.2 wins per season, with a high of 18 in 2007. The year before, in 2006, he'd become the first Venezuelan-born player to lead the league in wins, with 16. Yeah, wins are stats that only dumb people care about, but Zambrano didn't need outdated stats to be considered elite. For example, from 2003 to 2006, Zambrano's ERA plus never dipped below 135, and for his entire career, averaged 120. Stats don't necessarily convey the pure majesty of Zambrano's game. Today, Shohei Ohtani throws harder than almost every pitcher, and hits the ball harder than almost everyone not named Stanton, Judge, or Cruz. He is rightly lauded as a unicorn, but Zambrano was doing his version of Ohtani before social media blew up. Back when El Toro was playing, pitchers pitched and hitters hit, yet Zambrano's bat was hard to ignore. While the Cubs, the team he played for most of his career, didn't let him DH the few times they played AL competition, they did send him up to the plate to pinch hit 20-odd times in his career, because the man could, quite simply, rake. 3 times he won a Silver Slugger award. In 693 career ABs, he crushed 24 homers and drove in 71, with an OPS plus of 62, meaning that he, as a pitcher hitting every 5 days, somehow managed to be over half as good as a regular hitter in the lineup. His career home run percentage was a staggering 3.2%, well above the MLB average of 2.7%, on top of his career WAR at the plate being a positive number, at 5.6 overall. Chuck Knobloch, 44.6. Sometimes it's a serious injury that derails the career of an immensely talented player, and sometimes, for reasons only Sigmund Freud could understand, it's a mental block that blows out the tires. For any MLB player, the most haunting mental disease to come down with is the dreaded yips. Steve Sax, whose promising career was almost destroyed by a bizarre inability to throw to first, was the most famous victim of the issue in its infancy, though John Lester, Daniel Bard, and Rick Ankiel have all suffered some form of it since. What brought the issue into the limelight was that for 3 years in the early 80s, Sax sprayed the ball like he was shooting a t-shirt bazooka into the crowd. Somehow, he managed to get over it after that and stayed in the bigs for 12 seasons. Enter Chuck Knobloch. Like Sax, Knobloch played second and was named Rookie of the Year. Like Sax, Knobloch was a speedy leadoff hitter who could steal bases. But Knobloch was a much better player than Sax overall, as he could hit for a higher average, something that was valued very highly at the time, and was considered a plus defender who, in 1997, won a Gold Glove for his exceptional work in the field. During his run with the Twins, Chuck put up gaudy numbers. In 1996, he had a monster year, batting .341 while leading the league in triples. For 3 straight seasons, he finished in the top 20 for the league MVP. He seemed destined to be a legendary leadoff hitter, as he had some decent pop, could swipe 60 bases, draw 100 walks, and play flawless D at second. He had a ring from the 1991 Twins championship, and in 1998, he joined a Yankees team that was just about to start a World Series three-peat. Knobloch was entering the prime of his career, ready to claim his place as one of the best of all time in his position. But then came the yips. And it made no sense. By 1998, Knobloch was the kind of fielder who might commit 10 errors in a season, often less. The Twins, for one, had no problem playing him at short at times. But for whatever reason, when he joined the Yankees, he couldn't make easy throws to first base. 98 saw him make 13 errors, the most since his rookie year. Then, 1999 rolled around, and the nightmare really started. His errors doubled to 26, mostly on throws. Some he lobbed, some he fired. It didn't matter. The apex of his struggles was a game against the White Sox on June 15, 2000. Knobloch committed 3 errors in 6 innings, all on throws, and in the middle of the 6th inning, Knobloch asked to be taken out of the game, after which he left Yankee Stadium entirely before the contest was even over, changing into street clothes while the Yankees got clobbered 12-3. His WAR had fallen all the way from 8.7 in 1996 to 0.3 in 2000, a truly heartbreaking decline, and one of the steepest and most random of all time. Whenever the Yankees returned to Minnesota, the fans booed him and threw objects at his head. Knobloch turned dark, saying he'd take it to the house if he couldn't fix his throwing issues, whatever that meant. He would retire in 2002 after a poor year with the Royals at just 33 years old, a victim to one of the weirdest and most random conditions any player can have the misfortune of grappling with. When you think of the best pitchers of the 1990s, these names probably come to mind. Greg Maddux, Randy Johnson, Roger Clemens, David Cohn, and Kevin Appier. Oh, you didn't think of Kevin Appier. Not many people do, it turns out, but Appier is one of only 5 pitchers who logged over 1,800 innings with an ERA plus of 130 or more in the 1990s. We told you who the other 4 were. All of them won a Cy Young, or 2, or 3, or 6, and Maddux and Johnson are in Cooperstown. The best Appier ever finished was 3rd in the Cy Young balloting in 1993, when he led the league in ERA, ERA plus, and home runs allowed per 9 innings. Appier had the superior numbers to the eventual winner, Jack McDowell of the White Sox, with an ERA plus of over 40 points higher, But since McDowell had won 22 games to Kevin's 18, Appier didn't get the support he deserved. In today's world, he would have been a unanimous choice. The problem was, Appier played on some really bad Kansas City teams. The most they ever won during his tenure was 84 games. It was so bad that somehow, as dominant as Kevin was in 1993, he didn't even make the All-Star team. Typical for Appier was a year like 1996, when he went 14-11, which seemed pretty pedestrian at the time. He again didn't make the All-Star team and got 0 votes for the Cy Young. Yet, that year, Appier led the American League in fielding independent pitching, put up another elite ERA plus of 137, and struck out over 200 batters. Not even an All-Star nod? Seriously? Appier toiled on the mound during the height of the steroids era, and yet always seemed to excel, putting up an ERA plus of over 120 every year from 1990 to 1997. And he was tough. Really tough, as even after a torn labrum in 1998, which robbed him of some velo, he still kept grinding for another 7 seasons. He retired at the end of 2004, finishing his career with 7 times he had placed in the top 10 for WAR in a season, and yet only a single career All-Star nod. Cesar Cede&ntilde, 52.9. For much of his early career, Cesar Cede&ntilde looked like a lock for Cooperstown. He came up at 19 out of the Dominican Republic and hit .310 with the speed to steal bases at will and a glove in center that rivaled some of the game's greatest. The next year, he cracked 40 doubles to lead the league, and followed that with 39 the following season. By the time Cesar Cede&ntilde was 22, he'd won 2 Gold Gloves in center and had swiped 50 bases twice. His power had increased from 7 homers in a season to 25. Speed, power, a high average, and a truly golden glove. There was an obvious comp, and a baseball legend decided to call it out. The iconic Leo Durocher, who was Cede&ntilde's manager in Houston, said that Cede&ntilde had a chance to be as good as Willie Mays. The same Durocher who had managed Mays in New York and San Fran, and the same Willie Mays who between 1954 to 1966 had racked up a WAR of 124.1, 27.7 more than any other player during that span. So, Cede&ntilde seemed to be destined to be included in conversations that centered on the best ever, not simply if you'd be a Hall of Famer, period. After all, when you're 21 and put up an OPS plus of 162, and then as an encore roll out a 152, at a time when many of your peers are just getting to AAA, it's hard not to dream big. But 2 things robbed Cede&ntilde of being sanctified in Cooperstown. One was a horrific off-the-field incident that left a woman shot dead,
and Cede&ntilde in jail serving 20 days on an involuntary manslaughter charge.
The details are gruesome, but a quick recap is that Cede&ntilde claimed that a woman had been curious about his gun and had accidentally shot herself in the temple. Very perceptive teammates like Bob Watson, who became the first black GM in Major League Baseball history, said that Cede&ntilde was never the same hitter because he changed his swing to hit homers in order to make everyone forget about the incident. Perhaps. In the 3 years after the shooting, however, Cede&ntilde won 2 Gold Gloves and averaged an OPS plus of 130.8, slightly down from his best, but Cede&ntilde was still a big threat to run and stole more than 50 bases every year from 1972 to 1977. He was an extremely valuable player during this time. So, I mean, Watson could be right, because Cede&ntilde's batting average stayed below 300 after the shooting, except for 1 season, but I think the second reason is probably more likely as to what made Cede&ntilde become a footnote. He got hurt. And he got hurt a lot. In 1978, he tore a knee ligament. The next season, he came down with hepatitis. Then, in 1980 during the NLCS, he broke an ankle. That injury almost single-handedly robbed him of his speed and his elite center field defense. Unfortunately, during his 17 seasons, Cede&ntilde would only be able to play over 100 games in a season 12 times. He finished short of many of the MLB milestones one needs to be considered for Cooperstown, including 200 home runs, 1,000 RBIs, and 2,500 hits, all of which at the time meant even more to voters than they do today. Being swept into the dustbin of history must hurt for players who excelled at a high level. One day you're being compared to Willie Mays, and the next you're a trivia question at a sports bar. That's why one of the best parts of making baseball content is to unearth hidden gems who, for one reason or another, didn't garner the lasting attention that their talents merited. Using new age analytics to realize just how awesome someone like Kevin Appier really was feels like a revelation. But this list isn't the last word. We'll let you have that. In the comments, tell us who you think deserves to be rescued from the depths of baseball's abyss. Who in your mind was too good to be forgotten? Who knows? Maybe I'll even make a part 2.
Few things in baseball delight more than a dazzling defensive play. Maybe it's a third baseman barehanding a bunt, or a center fielder climbing the outfield wall to rob a home run, or a shortstop making a diving stop up the middle and popping up to throw the runner out, or a right fielder gunning out a runner going for third. The players who can make these plays, and make them repeatedly, live on in our minds and our highlight reels. Brooks Robinson, Ozzie Smith, Ken Griffey Jr., Roberto Clemente, Adrian Beltre, and Drolton Simmons, the list goes on. And then there are the guys on the other end of the spectrum, the ones you pray the ball doesn't find if they're on your team, the ones who really should or should have been full-time designated hitters if it was possible, the players who cost their teams runs game after game with their lackluster defensive play, whether it's because of their stone hands, erratic throws, or the fact they have the effective ground range of an 800-pound sea lion. The history of Major League Baseball is filled with atrocious defenders, but thanks to the improved statistical metrics in today's game, like D-WAR, UZR, DRS, and OAA, we have a better sense than ever just how much these guys are costing their teams, and what it really means to be a defensive liability on the ball field. So, without further ado, here's our list of the worst fielders in baseball history, and how they distinguished themselves from the competition. With that being said, this list is of course biased towards players from the past few decades, for whom we have better stats and more archival footage chronicling their poor defensive performances. Player number 1, Derek Jeter. No discussion of subpar defensive play would be complete without talking about the defensive profile of one Derek Jeter. And perhaps no topic is more likely to start a brawl in the Bronx. Derek Jeter is one of the best to ever play the game. Full stop. He won 5 Silver Slugger awards, was named to 14 All-Star teams, and in 2011 became just the 28th player to reach the 3,000 hit mark, ending his career with the 6th most hits in Major League history, including the most ever by a shortstop. Jeter was a 5-time World Series champion, a leader in the clubhouse, and a veritable icon in New York. He also may have been the single worst defensive player of all time. Wait, you say, but didn't Captain Clutch win 5 Gold Glove awards? Yes, he did. And doesn't he have his own signature defensive move, the Jeter jump throw? Yes, he does. And didn't he make some of the most memorable defensive plays in history? How can we forget the flip in the 2001 ALDS, or the header he took into the stands after chasing a pop-up in 2004? And sure, Jeter didn't make an excessive number of errors for a shortstop, averaging around 12 per season in his career, but calling a baseball player a good defender because they don't make too many errors is like saying a basketball player is a good defender because they don't commit a lot of fouls. It's just not the whole picture. Bottom line, defense is about preventing the other team from scoring runs, and when you look at Derek Jeter's performance with that in mind, it's an entirely different and far less impressive story. Let's start with DRS, or defensive runs saved, which tells you just how many runs better or worse a player has been relative to the average player at his position. Jeter's total DRS is negative 162, the worst of all time, while keeping in mind that the stat didn't even come out until year 8 of his career, meaning he likely would have accumulated far more if it had come out sooner. What's more, he also had 2 individual seasons that are in the top 10 poorest seasons by that metric. Overall, Jeter is head and shoulders above the second worst retired fielder, Prince Fielder, with a negative 100 DRS, and the second worst shortstop, Hanley Ramirez, with a negative 74. More on those two in a moment. If you look at UZR, Ultimate Zone Rating, you get pretty much the same result. Jeter's rating of negative 66.1 ranks dead last among qualified shortstops. And overall, despite having a career offensive WAR of 96.3, he also registered a negative 9.4 career defensive WAR, with just 3 years where that number wasn't negative. What these numbers primarily reflect is Jeter's complete lack of range, despite playing the position that perhaps demands more than any other. In other words, Jeter spent the entirety of his 20-year career playing one of the game's most demanding positions, despite somewhat obviously sucking at it compared to his peers. Jeter is obviously a better defensive athlete than Prince Fielder, Dave Kingman, and a host of other hit-first players in baseball history, but he should never have been allowed to play shortstop for so long. That fact, more than anything, is why he was able to accumulate such massively negative career defensive totals, but it also reflects how much Jeter was contributing in other ways over those 20 years. As no less than Bill James said of Jeter's defense, unusual weaknesses in sports can only survive in the presence of unusual strengths. The worst defensive shortstop in baseball history would have to be someone like Jeter, who was unusually good at other aspects of the game. Player 2, Gary Sheffield. Speaking of subpar shortstops, let's flash back to the late 1980s and the debut of the Milwaukee Brewers' much-heralded 19-year-old prospect Gary Sheffield. The Brewers drafted Sheffield as a shortstop and kept him there despite the fact that the teenager committed 87 errors in the minor leagues. You heard that right, 87. Sheffield's bat, however, was just too good to keep down, and so he was the Brewers' opening day shortstop in 1989. Sheffield played 70 games there, committing 12 errors before Milwaukee decided to try him at third base. It didn't really go any better. He committed 25 errors there in 125 games, and those were just on the balls he could get to. By the end of his age 21 season, Sheffield had already racked up a negative 1.2 career D-WAR. But the Brewers kept Sheffield at third, and so did the Padres and then the Marlins, even as he continued to rack up errors. Sheffield's 1993 season at third is likely one of the worst ever by a Major League defender. In 133 games there, Sheffield made 34 errors while fielding 899. That's right, less than 900. His D-WAR for that season alone was negative 3.0. If advanced statistical metrics had been in place, we can only wonder how historically awful that season would have looked. But Sheffield still had a strong arm and decent athleticism, so the Marlins switched him permanently to right field in 1994. If only the NL had had a DH back then, so much of what followed might have been avoided. It turned out that Sheffield was an unsurprisingly poor outfielder as well. By the end of his career, Sheffield had notched just a .964 fielding percentage and a negative 27.7 D-WAR, making him the worst defensive outfielder in baseball history. He even managed to run up negative 35 DRS, despite the stat not even existing until over 10 years after his big league debut. Even just run-of-the-mill defensive stats were shocking. Take putouts. As an outfielder, Sheffield made 1.9 putouts per 9 innings. That's about 0.2 less than the league average. In real terms, that means about 32 more baseballs a year dropped in the outfield when Sheffield was out there. That's a lot of singles and doubles instead of outs. On the other side of things, Sheffield, like Jeter, was a major offensive threat. He may even be in the conversation for the most underrated hitter in recent baseball history. After all, Gary was 41% better than the league average hitter by WRC+ over his career. He had 509 home runs. He stole 253 bases. He finished with more walks than strikeouts. His bat speed was truly otherworldly. Yet, he's not in the Hall of Fame. Part of this is because he was inconsistent throughout his career. He also was tied to PEDs, but a good case can be made that his ungodly awful defense is the biggest factor. Player number 3, Prince Fielder. Despite being a first baseman, having a father who was also a professional ball player, and having the last name of Fielder, Prince Fielder distinguished himself as one of the worst defenders to ever play baseball, and at arguably the easiest position on the field. Usually when a father and son both make it to the majors, there's a clear difference between them, and typically the son is the better player. But Prince Fielder and his father Cecil are that rare father-son tandem that are unusually evenly matched. The Fielders remarkably finished with the same career home run total, their RBI totals were a near match, and their number of 40 and 50 homer seasons were identical. Oh, and they are both horrendous first basemen. Cecil, for his part, despite spending a lot of time at DH for the Detroit Tigers, still managed to rack up a career negative 12.1 D-WAR in just 13 seasons. And young Prince, content to match so many of his father's career offensive numbers, decided to surpass him in at least one regard: defensive futility. In his 12-year career, Prince tallied a negative 20.5 D-WAR. He also somehow put up negative 100 DRS, the second worst total among retired players, after Jeter. This is despite the fact he played about 3,000 less innings than Jeter. His UZR of negative 45.5 is also among the 10 worst of all time. The big bone fielder was limited in his side-to-side movement, his arm was erratic, and he was too short to make great stretches at first. He was, to put it bluntly, a defensive liability for all of his 3 major league teams, and when Fielder joined Miguel Cabrera on the Detroit Tigers infield in 2012, it created perhaps the worst defensive corner infield tandem in baseball history. Still, Fielder could flat out hit, and we shouldn't forget that, and his first few seasons were truly historic. Fielder had 230 home runs through age 27. Only 3 Hall of Fame first basemen, Jimmy Fox, Orlando Cepeda, and Harmon Killebrew, ever managed to do that. Player number 4, Nick Castellanos. Jeter, Sheffield, and Fielder were all defensive monstrosities, but let's look at a current player who continues to delight and dismay us with his defense, while perhaps existing as the new single worst defender of all time, the Phillies' Nick Castellanos. In just over 8,000 career innings, Castellanos has managed to post the second worst total all time with negative 110 DRS. Remember how I kept making the distinction of retired players before? That's because of Nick. Like Sheffield, he has managed to be this bad at 3 different positions: right field, left field, and third base. We've already covered Castellanos' defense previously on our second channel, but the sheer hopelessness of it merits further attention in a setting such as this. It's hard to even know where to start. Let's begin where he started, third base, a position where he committed 54 errors in just 4 seasons, posting a .955 fielding percentage. Yeah, not good. Now, let's go back to his jaw-dropping negative 110 DRS. That's worse than Fielder, or Hanley Ramirez. We'll get to him. Or even Jeter, on a per-game basis, of course. It's so bad that the negative 64 Castellanos' tally just in right field would have him ranked 10th worst overall, without even mentioning his negative 45 at the hot corner. And, by the way, he currently is just 31 years old, with 11 big league seasons under his belt. He still has plenty of time to accumulate a lot more. During those 11 seasons, he's managed just a 13.8 B-WAR, largely due to his jaw-dropping total of negative 12.8 D-WAR over the same span. So here's a guy who has over 200 career homers and 340 doubles, almost 1,500 hits, not to mention a career 113 OPS plus, but it's still sometimes hard to justify putting him out in the field. And when you do, you just have to hold your breath and cross your fingers and hope it works out. Player number 5, Hanley Ramirez. As promised, we now come to the defensive ineptitude of perhaps the most controversial player of those presented when they played, Hanley Ramirez. Like some of the other guys we've discussed, Ramirez logged time with a number of teams in his 15-year pro career, and at a number of different positions, including shortstop, third base, first base, and left field. He could also be an offensive juggernaut at times, hitting 271 career home runs with an OPS plus of 124 and a career B-WAR of 38. All impressive totals, especially when considering his time up the middle with the Marlins. However, like the others, Ramirez was hopeless as a defender, pretty much no matter where you put him. Hanley is currently tied for third worst all-time among retired players in DRS with negative 74, and has the fifth worst career UZR mark at negative 53.5. He also, like Jeter, managed to do most of his defensive damage at shortstop, the position on the field that hurts the team most aside from perhaps catcher. Ramirez came up as a shortstop in the Red Sox organization before being traded to the Marlins and promptly winning Rookie of the Year in his first season in 2006. It was not for his defense. He racked up a negative 2.0 D-WAR in 154 games at shortstop. Ramirez remained a subpar infielder at that critical position for the next decade. It wasn't until 2015 when the Red Sox reacquired him and tried to convert him into a left fielder that Ramirez really took it to the next level of defensive negligence. Clearly the Red Sox underestimated the difficulty of the transition or the magnitude of Hanley's ineptitude at reading fly balls off the monster. This was, to put it lightly, a surprise. Left field at Fenway is famously the smallest in baseball, at about 103,000 square feet, almost 6,000 square feet smaller than the MLB average. Of course, unpredictable bounces off of said monster can make it more challenging, but that should have been no problem for the highly athletic former shortstop. Hanley's left field escapades and misplays quickly became fodder for highlight reels. His throws could also be an adventure. To make matters worse, Ramirez was disturbingly casual in his miscues, and dismissive of their importance. He clearly had zero interest in helping the Red Sox defensively. When asked by the press once about a potential move to first base, Ramirez responded with the loud, "Hell no." He did eventually move to first base, and it turned out he sucked there too in his limited time. So that's my personal list of the worst fielders in baseball history, but there are definitely some others worthy of mention, even if I can hardly call it an honorable one. First, who can forget Ryan Braun when he came up as a third baseman with the Brewers in 2007? He made previously mentioned former Brewer Gary Sheffield look like Brooks Robinson. Braun fielded just .895, making 26 errors in 112 games, and made .57 fewer plays per 9 innings than the average third baseman. His D-WAR for that rookie season, negative 2.9. The Brewers moved him to left field, where things were never that bad again, but never that good either. Braun finished with a career D-WAR of negative 9.9 in 14 seasons. Let's turn to another Ryan who played in the National League, and who today definitely would have been a DH, Ryan Howard. I'll say this for Howard, he made a big target at first base at 6'4", 250 pounds, but that's about it. His glove work was shoddy, his throwing mechanics were odd, and his reflexes left much to be desired. Yet, playing 13 seasons, all in the National League, there was no other place to put the Giant than first base. The result? A career negative 74 DRS that tied him with Hanley Ramirez, and a career D-WAR of negative 17.3. Finally, we come to Dante Bichette, father of Bo, and a beloved outfielder for the Colorado Rockies. The strong Bichette seemed tailor-made for Coors Field, at least as a hitter. As a fielder, the lumbering Bichette struggled to cover the large outfield, and often flailed in the corner as a ball caromed off the wall and between his legs. Perhaps the craziest number we could point out to detail the ineptitude of Bichette is the fact that despite 274 career homers, he had a B-WAR of just 5.6 in 14 seasons, largely due to a career D-WAR of negative 16.2. So, there you have it. Had enough of that terrible defense? Perhaps it's time to rinse out the bad taste by watching some Kevin Kiermaier highlights. That's better. Trevor Bauer, Julio Urias, Wander Franco. 3 of MLB's former brightest stars, until their off-the-field behavior landed them in limbo. As of now, each are basically banned from playing in the big leagues, with each facing uniquely vexing questions about their future in the game. To make it absolutely clear, by banned, we don't mean that these players face a permanent expulsion from the league, but instead that each has received disciplinary actions that has kept them off the field in a concrete way so far. Bauer is the only player who currently faces no procedural roadblocks to returning to the show, just situational, while Urias and Franco are still under investigation with their ultimate penalties remaining murky. These are three of the true stars of the modern game. Bauer is a former Cy Young winner and one of the game's most cerebral pitchers, an early adopter of training regimens that were once seen as risky, but are now standard practice. He majored in engineering at UCLA, and his own social media content speaks to his raw intelligence, sense of humor, and no-holds-barred personality. As one of the sport's more eccentric practitioners and controversial teammates, Bauer's fall doesn't seem completely out of character, but it's the reasons themselves that leave us as fans perplexed as to what roadblocks remain in his way back to the bigs. Urias came up with the Dodgers at age 19 and quickly showed why he was one of the top prospects in the major leagues. Signed out of Mexico when he was 16, Urias flashed brilliance in 2016 as a teenager, going 5-2 with an ERA of 3.39. For his career, his numbers are gaudy: 60-25, a 3.11 ERA, and an ERA plus of 1.34. But demons seemed to eat at him. Instead of going into a free agency offseason that promised to pay him $150 to $200 million, he faces criminal proceedings and the possibility of never playing in the big leagues again. Franco was baseball's consensus top prospect in both 2019 and 2020, a can't-miss talent who go weeks at a time without swinging and missing in the minors. Groomed from a young age for stardom on the diamond, the product of a prominent Dominican baseball family, Franco was a millionaire at the age of 16, signing for $3.8 million with the Tampa Bay Rays. His mother had two brothers, Eric and Willie Ibar, who each played in the big leagues themselves. Franco's two older brothers and father all played in the minors. El Patron was the chosen one, the prodigy who at the age of 13 knew he was going to be an elite big leaguer someday. He was essentially removed from school in 6th grade so he could focus on baseball, a darkly ironic twist and what could end up being his permanent downfall. While we can't provide analysis of the legal situation each finds themselves in, we can still look at these three players from the eyes of a general manager who must decide what his team's stance will be. Do any of these pariahs have a future in the game? If so, why or why not? Facts here are indispensable. The problem is, facts keep emerging that shift the dynamics for each player. Of the three guys, Trevor Bauer definitely seems the most likely to find himself back on an MLB mound soon, though that outcome is still largely unclear. Mookie Betts is on record for saying that he thinks Bauer deserves another chance. Hall of Famer Tom Glavine opined in a podcast that Bauer would never get the years he missed back, but that he deserved to, and that if he was innocent of the charges, that would be very problematic and something MLB would have to look at. So, what are the facts, and why are teams hesitant to sign Bauer? 4 different women have accused him of assault. However, no jurisdiction has charged Bauer with the crime, with the only piece of litigation filed against Bauer currently settled, with Bauer paying no money to the accuser, nor has he ever admitted to any wrongdoing. But let's back up a second to his high school days. Hart High School specifically, a baseball powerhouse in SoCal, where junior Trevor Bauer had established himself as a dominant force on the mound. In the clubhouse, he got bullied for being different, for training differently, for being obsessed with biomechanics and technology, for being outspoken. So, rather than stick around for his senior year, Bauer graduated a year early and transitioned to UCLA, where the same pattern repeated. Bauer didn't click with his teammates, who were largely led by Gerrit Cole, despite the success the team and Bauer had on the field. He got drafted 3rd overall in 2011 by the Arizona Diamondbacks, where again, Bauer had trouble fitting in. One reason he ended up being traded to Cleveland in 2013. Given this pattern, it's not unreasonable to assume that Bauer has trouble forming interpersonal relationships with teammates, another factor that GMs will have to look at when trying to sign him. However, it's also true that Bauer is intellectually curious, a risk taker, and someone who's willing to embrace unorthodox positions on controversial topics. As a pitcher, he's put up impressive numbers since his breakout year of 2018, when he gave up less than 7 hits per 9 innings and led the majors by allowing just 0.5 homers per 9. His ERA plus that season was 196, making him almost twice as valuable as an average MLB pitcher, a truly elite number. Spin rates, tunneling, pitch profiles, Bauer was one of the first to champion these metrics, long before they became fashionable. But on top of those aforementioned controversies, he's also done things like getting in a Twitter feud with a female college student in January 2019, who then complained that he and his followers had harassed her, along with other, we'll call them unsavory tweets, at least in the minds of MLB's GMs more than likely. Nevertheless, Bauer is still the same pitcher who went out and won a Cy Young in 2020, and then signed a $102 million deal with the Dodgers that next offseason. However, he would make just 17 starts for the team, and none after June 2021. Why? In June 2021, a woman in San Diego filed for domestic violence restraining order against Bauer, which led to MLB placing him on administrative leave while it investigated the charges. During this time, the Washington Post discovered that in 2020, a woman in Ohio had also filed for a restraining order against Bauer. Meanwhile, another woman in Ohio came forward with claims that Bauer had choked her out and hit her during the deed. Bauer insisted that all three women had engaged in consensual acts with him. In August 2021, the San Diego woman was not granted a restraining order, meaning that the court didn't think Bauer was an immediate danger to her. In February 2022, the LA County DA opted not to file charges against Bauer for his alleged assault. But in April of 2022, Commissioner Rob Manfred announced that Bauer would face a 324-game suspension for violating the league's domestic violence policy, double the longest penalty ever dished out for such a transgression. Bauer would appeal, with an arbiter eventually reducing the suspension by 130 games. Bauer would still miss all of 2022 and the first 50 games of 2023. Meanwhile, Bauer and the woman from San Diego would end up filing lawsuits directly against each other, with that litigation ending up shedding even more light on the overall case. It turns out part of the reason no criminal charges were filed was because the San Diego woman had bragged to her friends about Bauer's wealth, had videos and photos of her in bed with Bauer with no bruises showing, and had Googled setup before meeting Bauer, while even calling Trevor at the behest of the police, taping a call between them in which Bauer constantly brought up the issue of her consent and her safety. In short, no jury would convict him, so no charges were filed, and the woman from San Diego settled her lawsuit without any financial reward from Bauer, who maintains this relationship was 100% consensual. But we're not here to theorize about what happened behind closed doors. That's for Bauer and those women to settle themselves. However, the question remains, will Bauer ever play in the show again? He spent last year in Japan, going 11-4 with Yokohama. His stuff is still elite, but he's currently 34 years old, and the baggage still hangs heavy. Many MLB execs probably think that Bauer's checkered history outweighs the reward his right arm might provide. There would need to be a very well-constructed PR campaign to prepare for his return, and Bauer must be part of that effort. Will he curtail his more outrageous social media posts, at least in the MLB's very conservative view? Will he stop debating climate change? Will he give up his rants on X? Judging from his current feed, that's unlikely. Again, this isn't judgment from me. He can believe whatever he wants. However, those beliefs do present roadblocks to his return, so we can't ignore what he himself has put up. And what about the clubhouse? Can Bauer fit into a team's chemistry? If past his prologue, then the answer is perhaps not. But even when considering the PR optics in the clubhouse, Bauer's return probably also hinges upon another truism. Good pitching beats good hitting. A team will need a starter, and Trevor Bauer is among the best available options. Will he make himself available for cheap? That of course plays a factor as well. If a team could get his number 1 to 2 profile for a 3 to 4 spot price, this might help offset some of those more social risks. But it's unknown if he's willing to do so, and after establishing truly worldwide fame in Japan, it might be unlikely he leaves that kind of adoration behind for another chance at the bigs. But if Mookie Betts says that he has his blessing in return, don't be surprised if Bauer ends up on a big league mound sooner rather than later. An endorsement from arguably the most likable player in the MLB is no small feat, and could speak volumes on how he's perceived the league over in actual clubhouses. A tall, athletic, left-handed pitcher gets into a fight with his girlfriend. Hiding in some bushes, she calls 911. Inside a garage, 8 gunshots are fired. The girlfriend claims she was pushed against a wall. The player isn't arrested, but is later suspended for 20 games by the commissioner. Is this the story of Julio Urias? Nope, that's what happened to Aroldis Chapman in 2015. Following the suspension, he helped the Cubs win a pennant and then the World Series, and then signed an $86 million deal with the Yankees. New York owner Hal Steinbrenner said at the time that everyone would forget about the domestic violence suspension. He was right, but the situation with Urias is far graver than that of Chapman, because it's Urias' second alleged violation of the league's domestic violence policy. No player has ever been punished for 2 transgressions, and so most observers assume that the commissioner will hand down the longest suspension in league history, surpassing even the 394 games first levied against Bauer. It would be a stunning fall for a player who at age 16 was dominating the low minors, having been signed by legendary Dodgers scout Mike Brito, the same man who discovered Fernando Valenzuela. Even when he was 10 years old, Urias was already affiliated with the Mexican national team, and by the age of 14, he was already traveling with them. Signed on his 16th birthday, Urias surprised no one by striking out 6 over 3 innings in his pro debut, at an age when most American players are in the 11th or even 10th grade. By 19, Urias was part of the Dodgers rotation. Injuries curtailed the next 2 seasons, but by 2019, he was back pitching in long relief. By 2020, Urias was a Dodgers mainstay, helping the team to a World Series title by giving up nothing in all 4 series the Dodgers won. He then broke out in a major way as a starter in both 2021 and 2022, going a combined 37-10 with an ERA of 2.56. His Mexican heritage helped make him an icon in LA, and he was, in many ways, one of the faces of the organization, seen on murals and billboards all over town. But there were issues even during this peak in his career. In 2019, Urias was with a woman in the parking lot of the Beverly Center when someone saw him push his companion, though the woman would later say she tripped and fell. The police pressed no charges, but Manfred handed down a 20-game suspension. Urias would complete a 52-week counseling course and stay out of trouble to avoid further punishment. At the time, he said the right things about being accountable and growing as a person. If the story ended there, Urias would more than likely be signing a $150 to $200 million deal to be the frontline starter for a team somewhere. But he won't. In fact, there's a good chance he'll be charged with felony domestic battery stemming from his latest situation. In September 2023, following an LAFC match against Miami and Lionel Messi, Urias was seen leaving Exposition Park with his girlfriend. They were arguing about something she'd found in his phone, and during this argument, witnesses saw him attacking her. Police were called, and Urias was booked that night on felony domestic violence charges. Even worse for him, apparently the whole thing was caught on video by a witness. It hasn't since been leaked, but it might very well be at some point, and it seems plausible that it could have real evidence of illegal behavior. The Dodgers tried to get ahead of this PR disaster by removing his likeness from all team-related spaces and cleaning out his locker in the clubhouse before the season even ended. The LA County DA is still weighing whether or not to press charges, and until then, MLB won't sanction him. But as soon as those charges are or aren't filed, MLB will almost surely make an example out of Urias. Does that mean Julio won't pitch in the big leagues again? Not necessarily. There are comps, even if none are 1-to-1. Chapman, of course, continued on with his career as if nothing had ever happened. In 2022, Marcell Ozuna of the Braves started pushing and hitting his wife in front of the cops, who had responded to a 911 call. All of it was caught on body cam footage. Ozuna missed the rest of the season, including the playoffs, and then completed a pretrial diversion program and was back on the field in 2023. But neither Chapman nor Ozuna was charged with felony domestic battery, as Urias may soon be. They didn't spend time in jail, as Urias very well might. They didn't face suspensions that could exceed 3 or 4 seasons. Urias definitely has offers to pitch in Mexico, but it's hard seeing a team bringing him back in his 30s, especially with the PR nightmare it would cause. Never say never, but in this case it does seem pretty unlikely that Urias will ever throw another pitch in the big leagues. That is, unless the whole situation ends up being largely exaggerated. At this time, that does seem somewhat unlikely. Before we tackle the case of Wander Franco, there must be several caveats in place. The first is that in no way should anyone condone crimes against children, especially of the nature Wander has been accused of. If Franco is found guilty of anything remotely in that realm, then he's finished, not only professionally, but legally as well. It would be a sad, pathetic ending to a career that could have challenged some of the record books, or at least been one of the great bodies of work of his generation. The second is that everything currently being levied against him is at this point alleged, so we can't pretend to assume the facts. With that being said, we can at least discuss what his accusations are, and what they could mean for him overall. Currently, he faces the charges of exploitation and money laundering. The victim appears to be 15 years old, but was 13 when the relationship began. If these facts are confirmed 100%, then Franco rightly deserves a prison sentence, and his career is over. After recent messages were apparently leaked by the victim's mother, in which Franco seems to admit that he knew it was a risk, but it was, quote, one worth taking, along with uttering the unbelievably disgusting line of, "I want to raise you in my own way." It certainly doesn't seem like he's going to be beating the charges, if these are in fact confirmed by the court. Franco was on fire in August 2023 when these charges emerged. In his last 10 games, he had hit .415 with 4 homers and 9 RBIs. He had hit the first walk-off homer of his career. His WAR of 5.5 was one of the best in the game. His defense was Gold Glove caliber. He was living up to the hype that had surrounded him since he was 13 years old. Then came a post on Instagram, and Franco was immediately placed on administrative leave, where he remained for the rest of the year. The facts, so far, are this. In July 2023, a teenage girl in the Dominican Republic filed a complaint against Franco because of an inappropriate relationship. A month later, a different girl made similar claims on social media. Franco denied the allegations, though this was before he made a small run from the police around Christmas, before being officially arrested, and then subsequently having those seemingly damning messages leaked by the victim's mother, who had taken screenshots of the correspondence that was taking place on WhatsApp, itself a controversially hard encrypted app. Again, none of this is proven, but the fact does remain that the optics continue to get worse and worse for Wander. In fact, it's possible that by the time this video is released, new info will have come to light. The closest comp to the whole situation on the surface is Pirates closer Felipe Vasquez, who had an inappropriate relationship with a 13-year-old girl he'd met at PNC Park. The girl's mother found texts from Vasquez on her daughter's phone and reported it to the police in 2019. Vasquez was 26 at the time of their relationship. This was a clear case of criminal behavior, and Vasquez was subsequently found guilty and deported back to Venezuela. Even if an MLB team wanted to sign him, Vasquez can never legally be in the US again. The same could happen to Franco sooner rather than later. In fact, nothing short of charges not being filed could probably save his career at this point, and all signs indicate that charges will indeed be filed. But don't get it twisted, the Odyssey, even at that point, will still be far from over. In recent days, it seems to have come out that one of the victim's mothers is being charged with blackmail as a result of extorting Franco for over $100,000 over the length of his relationship with her daughter, making it even more of a mess for the courts to sort out. Regardless, for now, it seems impossible that Franco will ever take another at-bat in the big leagues again. But, like with anything in legal proceedings, only time will tell. Let's be perfectly clear, in no way are we advocating for or against any of these players to be allowed to play in the big leagues again. We aren't lawyers and don't know the nuances of the legal cases that each one face. It's also a good time to restate that everything mentioned in this video that's not outright been confirmed legally is in fact still alleged. We don't mean to present anything that's not proven as a fact. What we've tried to do is assess each of these players' future viability in the big leagues. Based on what we've discussed, the person who has the best chance of resuming his career is Trevor Bauer, since he's clear to play from a legal standpoint. The optics, however, will be a challenge to any team looking to give him a contract. Bauer's frustration is evident on his X feed, where he recently criticized the team for not signing him, but still wanting his help in vetting free agents. He's also stated he believes he's a top 15 pitcher in the world. Whether that's true or not, it certainly shows he believes he belongs back in the bigs. It's hard to see how Julio Urias could ever end up back on an MLB mound, but it's not impossible. If the DA forgoes filing domestic violence charges against him, MLB's suspension will still be lengthy. The video could get leaked and become a PR disaster. No player has faced a second violation of the league's domestic policy, as we've said, and if teams are shying away from Bauer, then Urias is arguably even more toxic, especially if he's convicted of a felony. However, if he's not, and he's willing to serve his sentence, and then he remolds his public image, it's possible he could make it back in the future, even if the chances are near zero. Franco could be in real legal jeopardy if the allegations are true. If he had a relationship with a 13-year-old girl, then he will, hopefully, go to prison for a long time. But given the bizarre nature of the story, there's still much that needs to be proven outright before any sentence is handed down by either the Dominican Republic government or the MLB themselves. But the victim herself has offered to give testimony, which is not a good sign for his case overall. Of the three, it certainly seems the most likely for Franco not only to face complete expulsion from baseball, but from the greater society at large for a number of years via prison sentence. Nothing is certain, however, and if somehow he's indeed exonerated of his crimes, I'll be the first to welcome him back and wish him the best. However, I find that outcome to be, at this time, extremely unlikely. Now, thank you for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did so, consider liking and subscribing and clicking this playlist for other essay content just like this. Have a great rest of your day.